They came from the coasts of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, lands too small for their hunger. The youngest sons of chieftains, shipbuilders, outlaws, and dreamers, they sailed into the fog with the same certainty that others sowed fields. What they sought was not just silver, but stories that would make their names outlast their bones. At first, their voyages stayed close to home, along fjords, across the Skagerrak trading furs, and amber for Frankish wine. But soon, the tide of ambition pulled them east across the Baltic, where rumor whispered of rich rivers and soft lands, with no kings strong enough to guard them. They called this direction Austervägar, the Eastern Way. The North Sea gave way to the Gulf of Finland, and beyond it, a labyrinth of rivers that ran deep into the continent. Here, the world grew wider. The Varangians met Finno-Ugric fishermen, Slavic farmers, and steppe riders, whose horses gleamed like bronze under the sun. There was danger everywhere, but also opportunity. If a river blocked them, they dragged their ships across the land. If a village resisted tribute, they traded instead. What the sword could not buy, the oath could. By the 8th and 9th centuries, their longships dotted the waterways of the east. From Lake Ladoga to the Dnieper, they founded small settlements, part fortress, part marketplace. The first of these, Ladoga, became a miracle of exchange. Arabic coins beside Norse jewelry, Greek wine beside northern furs. Archaeologists still find their fingerprints there, scales for weighing silver fragments of brooches, the charred bones of ships, long burned by time. The Varangians were not only raiders, they were connectors. They tied together the Baltic and the Black Sea, the icy forests, and the warm marble of Byzantium. Through them, Europe's blood began to circulate. The Arab silver flowed north, the Norsemen's furs wax, and slaves flowed south. Along those currents, stories and gods traveled too. They swore their loyalty not to kingdoms, but to one another. "We are the men of the oar," their saying went. A Varangian might die in a storm or in a market brawl, but he would never break his word. Oath and honor became their passport. By the time their ships reached the heartlands of what would become Russia and Ukraine, the Varangians had turned from wanderers into rulers. Villages became towns. Trade routes became domains. The Slavs called them Ruses, from the Old Norse roder, the men who row. And from that word, centuries later, a nation would take its name. But for now, it was still the age of beginnings of mist and promise, when the rivers glowed red at sunset and the future shimmered like distant sails. The Varangians did not know what empire they were building. They only knew that the sea behind them was too small and the horizon ahead too wide to ignore. The sea still smells of iron, but now the air carries a faint scent of money. Not paper bills, of course, real money. Metal. The kind that clinks in a pouch, tarnishes your fingers, and hums like a promise when it hits the bottom of a chest. It's the 9th century, and silver is flowing north like a tide that refuses to turn. In the soil of Gotland, beneath humble farmsteads and patches of rye, lie treasures that would make modern economists weep. Hoards, hundreds of them, packed with coins from places the locals can barely pronounce. Islamic dirhams from Samarkand Byzantine, solidi from Constantinople, deniers from Frankish mints. The largest, the Spillings hoard, will one day be found by accident in 1999. $14,000 coins and 70 kilograms of pure silver sleeping under Swedish earth for more than a millennium. But the men who buried that treasure weren't kings. They were the practical dreamers of their age, Varangian traders, the oath-sworn merchants of the north. They had found something far more profitable than raiding monasteries' logistics. Theirs was a system as elegant as it was perilous. Ships from Uppsala and Gotland sailed across the Baltic to the great crossroads of Birka. where goods from every corner of the known world met under the northern sky. Birka imagined it alive again. Smoke curling from blacksmith forges the smell of pitch and tanned leather hanging in the cold air. Traders shouting in Old Norse, in Slavic and Greek. A man from the east unfolds a bolt of silk the color of sunrise. A woman from the north slides a silver arm ring over her wrist to pay for it. On the docks, slaves unload barrels of honey and bundles of fur, while gulls scream like unpaid auditors. This is not the grim, raiding Viking world of popular imagination. It's cosmopolitan humming, almost civilized and IKEA, of the early medieval world, except the flat-pack items here are weapon parts and sacred icons. Archaeologists find fragments of Chinese silk woven with Central Asian patterns, glass beads from Bulgar lands, bronze jewelry forged in Slavic workshops, and yes, imported wine amphorae for those rare nights when the North remembered to celebrate something. Birka, for a time, becomes the beating heart of Varangian ambition. Its harbor bristles with longships, its streets with dialects and deals. From here, oaths and coins weave a web that will stretch all the way to Baghdad. And at the center of that web are the sworn merchants, men and women, who've realized that a promise kept can buy you more than a battle won. Ah, yes, women. For centuries, scholars thought the Viking world was a purely masculine enterprise, iron sweat and testosterone carved into runestone. Then, in a quiet lab, in 2017, DNA spoke otherwise. The bones engraved BJ581 at Birka, long celebrated as the warrior grave, complete with sword axe arrows and 2 horses turned out to belong not to a man, but to a woman. Her bones bore the marks of a life spent in command, not in servitude. She had traveled, fought, and judging by the placement of her weapons, likely led. A Varangian commander, buried with the honors of her rank. The discovery rattled the halls of academia, but delighted anyone who suspects that courage never cared about chromosomes. So when we speak of the Varangians, forged in silver and ice, we mean precisely that a people shaped by trade and tempered by hardship. Theirs was a chemistry of extremes luxury and frost profit and peril. Every dirham they carried northward had crossed deserts, empires, and languages before it reached a Swedish pouch. And every coin bore silent witness to an unbroken chain of human hands. Persian minters, Arab merchants, Khazar intermediaries, Slavic boatmen, and finally these Norse traders who could turn anything furs, slaves, amber, even courage into silver. Why silver? Because it was the universal passport, the global Wi-Fi of the 9th century. In a world before national currencies, silver was the one metal everyone agreed was valuable, and the Varangians learned to measure, weigh, and cut it with almost bureaucratic precision. At Birka's workshops, archaeologists have found hundreds of tiny hack silver fragments, coins sliced into pieces, each tested with a bite or a scratch to prove purity. Every fragment is a small contract, a tangible piece of trust. But trade alone doesn't explain the fire in their eyes. Something deeper hums beneath the economics, an instinct to move, to expand, to chase the shimmer at the edge of the map. Scandinavia is beautiful, but stingy. The fields yield little, and the long winters starve ambition. The young sons of chieftains, landless, but proud, crave something the fjords cannot offer, a destiny. And so, like migratory instincts carved into bone, they turn their faces east, where the sunrise paints the clouds with gold dust. The river systems of Eastern Europe become the veins of this new commerce. From Lake Mälaren, the Swedish heartland, a network of waterways flows toward the Gulf of Finland and beyond. The Baltic is no longer a border, it's a doorway. Beyond it lies a world of forests and steppe of Slavic tribes and Turkic khans of Byzantine riches glittering behind city walls that gleam like distant mirages. And somewhere between all of that lies opportunity or disaster, depending on the wind. At the docks of Burka, a Varangian ship is readying to leave. The captain, a man named perhaps Hroar or Björn, names that sound like thunder, clearing its throat, tightens his belt of silver rings. His crew counts the cargo furs, walrus tusks, beeswax amber, and a few human beings bound for southern slave markets. Trade in their world has few moral boundaries. Beside the ship, a priest of the old gods mutters blessings to Njord, Lord of the Sea, while a young woman presses a carved amulet into her husband's palm. He promises to return by winter, though both know he might not. The Varangian oath has many forms, but every one of them is a gamble. When they push off, the oars bite into black water. The rhythm of rowing merges with the groan of hull timbers. Above, gulls wheel like omens. They are not simply sailing into foreign territory. They are sailing into history, into the pages of chronicles not yet written. Behind them, Burka hums, unoblivious to its fate. Within 2 centuries, it will fall silent. Its harbor silted its fame past to younger cities like Novgorod and Kiev. But its legacy will endure in every Varangian route, every coin buried in northern soil, every oath whispered before dawn. And so, the story moves eastward. Beyond the archipelago, beyond the gray line, where the Baltic becomes something else, an open path. The world ahead is threaded by rivers, like silver veins, and at their end lies rumor cities of marble emperors who pay in gold, and markets where a man's name can travel farther than his ship. For now, the sea closes behind them, swallowing their wake. The wind sharpens. The horizon darkens. Ahead, the sun climbs over a continent of opportunity, and the Varangians, those merchants of frost and fire, follow it like moths chasing a promise of warmth. By now, the sound of rowing is as steady as breathing. Each stroke cuts the water with quiet authority. The Varangians, having tasted the wealth that trickles in from the east, are no longer content to wait for merchants to come to them. They are going to find the source. It begins with whispers. Traders returning from the Gulf of Finland speak of vast rivers that snake deep into unknown lands. Rivers that can carry a ship almost all the way to the heart of the world. Somewhere beyond those forests, they say, are markets where silk flows like water and silver is counted by the handful. To men who measure life by opportunity, that's all it takes. One rumor, one promise. The push east is not a single expedition, but a gradual migration, an exhalation of ambition from Sweden's cold lungs. Every spring, more longships set sail from the Mälaren Valley, gliding between the islands and out toward the open Baltic. The coasts of Estonia, Latvia, and Finland become dotted with landing camps, temporary settlements of Norsemen, building boats, drying nets, trading with locals, and quietly learning the terrain. The landscape they enter is vast and silent. The dense northern forests rise like green walls. The rivers wind through them like veins of mercury. This isn't the sea they know. It's a labyrinth of freshwater shallow channels, hidden currents, and portages where ships must be dragged across land. Yet for men who grew up in forests and fjords, the challenge is almost comforting. They cut trees for rollers, grease them with bear fat, and haul their vessels over the damp earth, while mosquitoes feast like miniature Valkyries. The riverways become their new ocean. The Volkhov, the Lovat, the Dnieper. These names will one day form the spine of Eastern Europe's first great trade highway, the route from the Varangians to the Greeks. But at this moment, it's still an idea taking shape. For every successful voyage, another ends in tragedy, a storm, a raid, or the simple mistake of choosing the wrong tributary and vanishing into the woods forever. Exploration and entrepreneurship are, after all, polite cousins of insanity. Behind this eastern expansion lies something more than greed. Scandinavia, by the 9th century, is bursting at the seams. The fertile valleys around Lake Mälaren can feed only so many. As petty kings rise, competition becomes fierce. A younger son, with no inheritance, has two options: serve another man's hall, or build his own, somewhere the old rules don't apply. For many, the rivers of the East promise a clean slate, a chance to carve out a kingdom with an axe in one hand and a balanced scale in the other. At home, chieftains hoard land. Abroad, the world still feels unclaimed. The Varangians see themselves as both traders and colonizers, and the eastern lands are not empty. They're alive with Slavic tribes, Finno-Ugric, fishermen, and nomadic steppe riders. But in a world without maps, borders are only as real as the courage it takes to cross them. Population pressure isn't the only shove eastward. The collapse of Charlemagne's empire in the west disrupts old markets and safe trading lanes. Pirates infest the North Sea. Kingdoms squabble. So the Swedes, pragmatic as ever, look elsewhere. To the east, no Frankish taxes, no kings demanding tribute, just miles of river and rumor. The first serious bridgehead is Ladoga, Staraya, Ladoga, as it will later be called. Around the mid-700s, it begins as a small settlement where Baltic traders meet Finnic hunters and Slavic farmers. Soon, it grows into a thriving entrepot, its wooden quays heavy with goods, northern furs, honey amber wax. Here, the first true Varangian community takes shape, a microcosm of what will later be Rus. Archaeologists digging there centuries later will find longhouses built in both Scandinavian and Slavic styles, iron scales for weighing silver, and beads of Middle Eastern glass. In the charred remains of one hall, they'll even find traces of imported Byzantine wine, a luxury so exotic that it must have tasted like civilization itself. These discoveries tell us something crucial. Long before the Varangians ruled cities, they ruled trade routes. Each spring, the same ritual unfolds. The ice breaks on the lakes. The ships are hauled to the water. The men pack their cargo furs, bundled in wax skins, bags of salt slaves captured or bought along the coasts. They say farewell to the women and old men who keep the home farms alive, and they push off into the east, where every bend of the river might hide fortune or death. For weeks, they move through a landscape of silence and mist. Birch and pine crowd the banks, their reflections warping in the current. Sometimes they encounter villages, clusters of huts, where smoke rises straight into the still air. Trade begins with caution, a gesture, a sample of fur, a flash of silver. Words are few, smiles are rare, but slowly a fragile trust builds. Oaths are exchanged in gestures rather than speech, hands on hearts, goods weighed and accepted. The Varangians' reputation as oath keepers becomes their passport. Still, not everyone welcomes them. Some Slavic tribes see opportunity in cooperation. Others see only danger. There are ambushes in narrow channels, raids on camps left too lightly guarded. A few chieftains rise to power by taxing the river routes, turning themselves into gatekeepers of commerce. The Varangians, rather than crush them, learn to negotiate, sometimes with gifts, sometimes with steel. It's less about conquest than conversion, turning enemies into business partners. The rivers themselves become characters in the story. The Volkhov carries the travelers south to Lake Ilmen, where the water mirrors the clouds so perfectly it's hard to tell sky from earth. From there, they portage to the Lovat, then overland again to the Dnieper, the great spinal column of their new world. Along its banks, they'll build the cities that will later define Rus's Smolensk, then Kiev, but that's later. For now, we're still in the rough beginnings, when every river bend feels like the edge of the map, and every sunrise brings new calculations: how much food left, how many men sick, how many knives still sharp. Yet for all the hardship, there's exhilaration. They're no longer small fish, in a crowded Scandinavian pond. They're pioneers. The East is their wilderness of possibility, and with every mile, they travel their oaths to one another mean more. At night, they beach the ships on sandbars and make camp. Fires flicker under the dark canopy of spruce. One man mends a torn sail. Another sharpens a blade. The youngest, barely more than a boy, lies on his back, staring up at unfamiliar stars, listening to wolves in the distance. Someone starts humming an old song, half prayer, half boast, about Odin's ravens watching over travelers. In the glow of the firelight, their faces look older than their years carved by salt and ambition. Back home in places like Uppsala and Sigtuna, people will gossip about these men who vanish every spring and return, if they return, laden with silver slaves and strange stories. Children will play at rowing east. And soon, a new word will settle into the language, Varangians. Those who have sworn the oath. It will mark them not only as men of courage, but as members of a brotherhood whose contracts are written in blood and honor rather than ink. By the end of the 9th century, the pattern is set. The Varangians are no longer just traders from Sweden. They are the architects of an eastward network stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. What began as seasonal voyages becomes a migration, a colonization, a slow fusing of cultures. The Norse bring shipwright skill and ruthless efficiency. The Slavs bring land labor and local knowledge. Out of this mixture, something entirely new begins to form a civilization that will one day call itself Rus. For now, though, it's still just the rhythm of oars and the shimmer of the river ahead. Each bend carries the smell of wet earth and promise. The men know that the further they go, the less likely they are to see home again. But the pull is irresistible. Beyond the horizon lies Constantinople, the fabled city of gold domes and jeweled mosaics. They don't yet know its name, but they can already feel its gravity. Morning mist curls off the river, like smoke from a sleeping dragon. The water is glassy, faintly gold in the sunrise, and the oars bite through it in slow rhythm. You can almost hear the creak of the timber and the low grunts of men pulling together, rowers, traders, warriors, all the same people in different moods. The Varangians have entered their new world. The Baltic lies far behind them now. Around them stretches a landscape of silence, endless forests of pine and birch wild geese, calling above a kingdom of water and mud. Yet this silence is alive. Beneath it hums the pulse of commerce. The rivers ahead, Volkhov, Lovatdnieper, are the arteries through which the north will soon bleed silver, and the south will breathe luxury. The trick is to survive them. River travel sounds simple until you try it. These waterways twist like veins across a continent that hasn't agreed on being navigable. There are fallen logs rapids, sudden shallows that ground ships with cruel timing. And yet this is the genius of the Varangians. They turn inconvenience into infrastructure. A shallow bend, build a towpath, a break between rivers. Invent the art of portage. They'll drag their ships, actual ships mind you, some 50 feet long overland across mud and rock using greased logs and brute determination. Picture it, 20 men straining under ropes, shoulders black with sweat, pulling their vessel over damp earth, while mosquitoes swarm thick as smoke. One man falls, another curses, and then the ship slides free, groaning like a beast reborn into another river. To an outsider, it looks insane. To the Varangians, it's Tuesday. Bit by bit, they master the geography of the East. Every river bend becomes a landmark. Every portage, a memory etched in sweat. They name the dangerous spots after curses or jokes that make sense only to them. They dig makeshift channels and reinforce mud trails with wooden planks. Later, Archaeologists will find those trackways still buried beneath the forest floor, evidence of a civilization that didn't just travel the rivers, but engineered them. Their ships evolved too. The longboats of the open sea are sleek and deep-bellied, built to cut waves. But here, the rivers demand something different. So the Varangians designed shallow draft vessels with flexible planks and lightweight hulls that can be hauled like sleds. They're less beautiful than the seafaring dragons, but far more practical, a kind of hybrid between canoe and cargo ship. They'll become the workhorses of the northern trade routes, hauling up to 20 tons of goods through lands that will one day call themselves Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. What fills these ships? Not plunder, not yet. These are commercial expeditions, armed but purposeful. The North offers what the South craves: furs so fine they feel like smoke in your hands, amber glowing like frozen sunlight, walrus, ivory beeswax, honey, and inevitably slaves. Human beings traded alongside the rest. It's an uncomfortable truth, but a central one. The Varangians don't just connect markets, they connect economies of desire. In return, they carry home silk spices, glass wine, and silver, especially silver. The precious metal flows northward in rivers of its own, stamped with Arabic calligraphy or Byzantine crosses. It piles up in Gotland hoards and Nordic temples, transforming Scandinavia's economy, and with it, its imagination. Wealth is no longer just cattle and land. It's mobility, the ability to command men to build halls to mint influence. Silver buys loyalty, and loyalty builds kingdoms. The first nodes of this new network form at natural choke points, places where trade pauses, where men must stop, rest, and repair. Ladoga in the north, Smolensk in the center, and further south, Kiev, the jewel waiting to be claimed. Each will grow from camp to town to city, tied not by ethnicity, but by enterprise. Here the Varangians meet Slavs and Finno-Ugric peoples, learn their languages, marry their daughters. Out of this cultural alchemy emerges something neither Scandinavian nor Slavic, but both a hybrid identity born of rivers and trade routes. At night, their camps flicker with the light of small fires. A man counts coins by the glow. Another hammers a broken rivet back into place. The air smells of pine resin, tar, and smoke. From a nearby hill, the forest looks like an ocean of shadows, with islands of orange flame where the Varangians rest. Sometimes they sing low rhythmic songs that roll like water. The melody changes from Norse to Slavic and back again, as though the very act of travel is reshaping their language. Yet for all the rhythm and routine, danger is never far. The rivers are alive with eyes. Local tribes watch from the bank's arrows, knocked, waiting for a ship to ground itself. Bandits strike where the channels narrow. When that happens, the trading voyage becomes a battlefield. Shields rise, oars turn to weapons, and the calm surface of the water shatters with shouts and splashing. The Varangians fight not like raiders, but like professionals, disciplined, cohesive, terrifying. Once the skirmish ends, they clean their blades, patch their hulls, and continue. There's no pause for moral reflection. The river doesn't wait. Over time, these waterways cease to be unknown wilderness. They become mapped in memory, structured by oaths and tolls. The Varangians establish seasonal way stations, small fortified settlements where goods can be stored and caravans reorganized. Some begin as simple winter camps. Others, like Smolensk, will grow into cities whose names echo for centuries. Each post is both a marketplace and a military base, blending pragmatism with paranoia. For every trader weighing silver, there's a watchman scanning the tree line. One might imagine this eastward expansion as purely material, a story of commerce, but it's also spiritual in its own way. The Varangians carry with them not just goods, but a worldview. To travel this far requires faith, not in gods necessarily, but in the idea that the world is connected, that courage and cleverness can stitch together cultures. Their oaths become the moral compass of their journeys. Break your word, and you're not just dishonored. You're adrift, cut loose from the invisible network that keeps this whole precarious enterprise afloat. When spring floods come, the rivers swell and rage. Entire expeditions are lost to the current, their ships splintered against unseen rocks. The survivors mark the places with runes carved into trees, warnings to those who follow. And follow they will. Every tragedy leaves a lesson. Every loss becomes part of the lore that guides next year's voyage. By the mid-9th century, the river system is no longer just geography, it's a living machine. Goods flow south, wealth flows north, and information flows both ways. Byzantine merchants begin to hear of the northern men with pale eyes and perfect discipline. Slavic tribes start to trade rather than fight, realizing that a Varangian alliance is worth more than a Varangian raid. Slowly, imperceptibly, the river roots carve the skeleton of a new civilization. Some nights, after days of rowing, the men beach their ships on a high bank and climb above the mist. From there, they can see the silver line of the river stretching toward the horizon, curving through forests that seem to have no end. Below them, campfires flicker like tiny stars. Someone laughs. Someone curses, someone hums the beginning of a song that will one day become a saga. The wind carries the smell of rain and wet pine. Somewhere far south so far, it feels like myth, lies Constantinople, the city of cities. They've never seen its walls, but the stories are enough to keep them moving. And so the Varangians row, on part merchant, part missionary of commerce, transforming geography into destiny. Each portage and trade, each burned settlement and sworn pact brings them closer to the Black Sea, the threshold of empires. Soon they will reach the great bluff where the Dnieper bends, and on that hill they will build a capital. For now, they drift through mist and fortune, their oaths still holding their silver still shining. The rivers whisper beneath their hulls, promising both wealth and danger, as all good promises do. By the time they reach the great lake called Ilmen, the Varangians have grown used to the rhythm of rivers, the endless push and pull between danger and opportunity. But here, the world feels different. The air is softer, the forests thinner, the horizon wide and gleaming like a mirror. They have arrived at the northern gate of their new dominion, the place the Slavs call Holmgard, and the Norse will one day call Novgorod. It isn't yet a city. It's a collection of timber walls and muddy streets clinging to the edge of the lake, half market, half fortress. But it hums with the same nervous energy as Burka once did, a place where the known world ends and the possibilities begin. The scent of tar and smoked fish hangs over the harbor. Ox carts creak through puddles. Traders shout in 3 or 4 languages, their words overlapping into a kind of music. Here coins from Baghdad pass through hands roughened by Scandinavian winters. Bolts of Byzantine silk are weighed beside barrels of mead, and gossip travels faster than any ship. For the Varangians, Novgorod is more than a port. It's a statement, a foothold, the first truly permanent center of their power in the east. From its high wooden ramparts, you can see the glitter of the Volkhov River winding north toward Lake Ladoga, and from there to the Baltic and home. Southward, the same river leads into the vast interior, connecting them to Kiev, and beyond it, Constantinople. Novgorod sits at the crossroads of everything, the pulse point between two worlds. By the mid-9th century, the settlement has already become a small miracle of organization. Rows of workshops hammer from dawn till dusk, Blacksmiths forging axes and spearheads, jewelers twisting filigree silver into bracelets, carpenters shaping planks for boats. The smell of wet oak and coal dust fills the air. Archaeologists centuries later will dig into the mud here and find layers upon layers of human history. Wooden streets, preserved by the waterlogged earth, each stratum like a frozen heartbeat. Beneath the mud, they'll even find scraps of birch bark, carved with writing shopping lists, love notes IOUs, the earliest post-it notes of Eastern Europe. Those scraps, fragile as onion skin, whisper something vital. They tell us that Novgorod wasn't just a camp of soldiers and traders. It was literate, bureaucratic, self-aware. People here kept accounts, tallied debts, sent messages. In a world where most men couldn't sign their names, these northern merchants were leaving paper trails centuries before Europe's great universities were born. Walk its market square, and you'd see it, the meeting of worlds. Finnic hunters in fur cloaks, Slavic potters with clay under their nails, Greek merchants from Cherson carrying amphorae of wine, and pale-haired Varangians weighing silver on little bronze scales. The chatter is constant, punctuated by laughter, curses, and the occasional sword being unsheathed for emphasis. But the remarkable thing is that it works. Somehow, amid all this chaos, commerce thrives. The city is governed by oaths and reputation. Break a deal in Novgorod, and you won't trade again anywhere on the route to the Black Sea. That's the invisible empire the Varangians are building, an empire of trust. There are no written constitutions yet, no police, no central bank. Just the simple equation, your word is worth more than your sword. The Varangians enforce it by example. They punish thieves and cheats with frightening efficiency, and in return, local merchants accept them not as conquerors, but as guarantors of order. They may be foreigners, but they bring predictability, and in the medieval world, that's rarer than peace. The settlement's wooden walls are tall, but not grand. Inside them lie longhouses in the Scandinavian-style plank roofs, central hearths, sleeping platforms along the walls. Smoke seeps through the thatch, curling into the gray sky. Next door, Slavic huts squat low to the ground, built half into the earth for warmth. Between these homes runs a muddy street lined with barrels, sleds, dogs and children chasing each other through puddles. It isn't beautiful, but it's a live, messy, multicultural human. Here a Norse trader haggles in bad Slavic. There a Slavic woman sells honey cakes to men who pay in cut silver, each fragment carefully weighed on scales. A strange harmony hangs over it all, forged by necessity. The Varangians have learned something profound: trade works better than terror. Unlike their Western cousins, who raid monasteries and vanish, the Varangians stay. They build, negotiate, adapt. They learn the local languages and customs, and soon their children speak both Norse and Slavic with equal ease. The bloodlines mix, and from this mixture, something new begins to take root. By night, the river glows faintly under the moon. The wooden walls cast long shadows. A watchman on the rampart hums to himself, eyes scanning the forest edge. Outside, wolves prowl, their howls echoing across the frozen fields. Inside, fires burn low in the longhouses. Men drink from horn cups and whisper plans for the coming spring expeditions, to Smolensk, to Kiev, maybe even to the Black Sea. They talk about distant Constantinople, the city of gold, as if it's a place from a dream. But already some of them have seen its emissaries passing through. Byzantine traders, wary and amused, describing walls so high you could hang the sky from them. In the morning, Novgorod wakes early. Bells carved from bronze clang over the rooftops, calling men to market. The docks are crowded with ships of every shape and origin. Narrow, Norse longboats, broad Slavic river barges, light Finno-Ugric canoes. Goods are loaded, bargains struck, and somewhere a scribe records it all on a strip of birch. By midday, the square smells of smoked fish tar and ambition. To the south lies the next frontier, the Dnieper route to Kiev. Everyone knows it's dangerous. Tribes demand tolls, rapids wreck ships, and the Khazars still control the lower river with their mounted patrols. But beyond those hazards lies Byzantium itself, the market of markets. Men who make it there return with silks and coins heavy enough to buy a throne. The temptation is irresistible. So Novgorod becomes the staging ground, the springboard for the next leap. The Varangians build warehouses filled with supplies, spare planks, rope pitch, dried fish meat barrels, and bundles of fur. They establish a winter schedule repair in the cold month sail when the rivers thaw. Contracts are made before the fire, sealed not with wax, but with handshakes and shared cups. In a world still half pagan, an oath is sacred currency. Some scholars later call Novgorod the First Republic of the North. It's an exaggeration, but not entirely wrong. The Varangians and Slavs who rule here form assemblies vesh, where men gather to shout their opinions until consensus forms. It's loud, chaotic, but it works. Authority is a matter of persuasion, not inheritance. You can almost see in it the faint outline of the future Russian Mir, the communal council, and even echoes of Scandinavian things, the old Viking parliaments. Democracy, in its rawest, most brawling infancy, flickers here in the mud. At sunset, the lake glows bronze. A cold wind drifts across the water, rattling the tall grass. The city quiets, and for a moment, everything feels suspended between worlds north and south, pagan and Christian, raider and ruler. The Varangians, for all their pragmatism, must sense it. This is more than trade. It's transformation. Every coin exchanged, every oath, sworn, every plank nailed into a longhouse, pushes them closer to a destiny they can't yet imagine. Novgorod will endure for centuries. It will outlast kings and empires, become a symbol of independence and resilience. But in this moment, it's still raw, smelling of smoke and damp wood, a frontier town with delusions of grandeur. A place where you can buy silk with squirrel pelts, learn 4 languages in a single argument, and watch the birth of a nation between mouthfuls of fish stew. And tomorrow, as always, the ships will push off again, south this time, toward the sun and the promise of Kiev. The northern gate will stand behind them, a memory carved in frost and silver, watching the river carry its sons toward fortune and unknowingly into legend. Spring returns with the sound of ice breaking like glass. The Volkhov River shudders, the snowmelt surges, and Novgorod's harbor awakens as if stirred by an ancient instinct. One by one, the Varangian ships are dragged from their winter cradles, patched, tarred, and shoved into the cold current. Their sails dyed ochre and red flare, like dawn against a sky still pale with frost. Southward, they go again, following the river's gleaming thread toward the heart of the continent. This journey is different. It's no longer exploration, it's system. The rivers have become a kind of clockwork, a machine of trade and tribute that turns with annual precision. The men who row them are not wanderers anymore. They are couriers of civilization, ferrying wealth and influence along the vast, glittering spine that ties the Baltic to the Black Sea. The first major waypoint is Smolensk. Perched on a high bluff above the Dnieper, it guards one of the few natural crossings between northern forests and southern plains. The city smells of pine tar, charcoal, and money. The Varangians know its rhythm by heart, the long pull, upriver the portage through thick mud, and then the sight of its wooden ramparts rising through morning fog. Smolensk is no frontier camp now. It's a miniature kingdom. Its markets brim with goods from 3 worlds, furs and amber from the north, iron and honey from the west, glass and silk from the south. The voices in its square blend like the rivers themselves. Old Norse, hard as iron, Slavic soft as smoke, Turkic lilting like flute music. Bargains are struck with a nod, or a weight placed gently on a scale. A deal here doesn't need language, it needs trust. The Varangians have learned to live between cultures. In Smolensk, they trade repair and gather gossip. From a Bulgar merchant, they hear that the Khazars to the southeast are growing nervous. New powers are rising along the Dnieper. From a Slavic chieftain, they hear of fertile valleys near a place called Kiev, where high bluffs overlook a mighty bend in the river. A good place, he says, for a fortress. A dangerous place, too, because whoever controls that bluff will control everything that moves between the Baltic and the Black Sea. It's enough to stir Varangian ambition. Every trade route needs a center, a city that is both sword and shield. Smolensk is too far north, too enclosed by forests. Kiev, they decide, could be the key to the south, the place where commerce becomes kingdom. Before that dream can live, they must reach it. The river ahead is long and temperamental. The Dnieper meanders like a lazy serpent, changing its shape with each flood season. Sometimes the current runs swift, pulling the boats like eager horses. Sometimes it lies still and shallow, forcing the men to wade, dragging their ships by rope. Portages are marked with totems, bare skulls, hung from trees, charms carved from bone, to ward off the spirits of drowned sailors. Along the banks, Slavic villages huddle close to the water. Smoke rises from hearths, and curious faces peer out as the strange northern men pass by. Trade follows cautious but inevitable. A fox pelt for a handful of salt, a spearhead for a loaf of bread. The Varangians learn quickly that diplomacy is cheaper than battle. They pay tolls, share mead, offer gifts. And in doing so, they weave a web of alliances that will one day become the very structure of Rus. Every few days, they encounter tributaries, small towns, where local rulers collect payments in honey wax and slaves. The Varangians accept these tributes as tolls, but the balance of power is already shifting. Each transaction teaches the locals something new about hierarchy, about law, about the strange efficiency of the oath-bound northerners who always keep their word and always return next spring. Slowly, a system takes root. One part commerce, one part governance. The Dnieper's banks are more than trade posts. They are classrooms. Here, the Slavs learn the Varangian way of weights and measures. The Varangians learn the Slavic way of survival in these wide, unpredictable lands. The blending is subtle but irreversible. Even the gods begin to mingle. At riverside shrines, idols of Thor stand beside carved wooden effigies of Perun, the Slavic thunderer. A single storm now might belong to both. The deeper south they travel, the more the land changes. The forests thin into rolling plains. The wind smells of grass and steppe. The sun grows hotter. It's another world open wide, filled with horsemen whose arrows can darken the sky. These are Khazar lands, still powerful, still rich from their control of trade between east and west. The Varangians tread carefully here. Tribute must be paid, or at least negotiated. A misstep could bring disaster, but fate or clever timing saves them. The Khazar Khaganate is weakening, stretched thin by wars and internal strife. Its grip on the upper Dnieper loosens just as the Varangians arrive in strength. Power like water flows downhill, and right now it's flowing toward them. By the time the first Varangian flotillas reach the bluffs of Kiev, the place is little more than a fortified trading outpost, ruled by two semi-legendary figures, Askold and Deer, possibly Varangians themselves, possibly local lords. Their fortress overlooks the river like a watchful hawk, commanding every boat that passes. The city's position is perfect, far enough inland to be safe from seaborne raids, yet close enough to the steppe to reach the great southern markets. The Varangians step ashore and understand instantly this is destiny. Here, on this high hill, they can build something that lasts. Not just a marketplace, but a capital. A place where all the silver from the north and silk from the south will converge. The Dnieper below them glitters in the sun, like a road of melted metal, flowing straight toward the Black Sea and Byzantium beyond. It's as if the world itself has drawn a map for them. Archaeologists will later find the traces of those first fortifications, timber walls, storage pits, arrowheads. They'll find evidence of planning straight streets, specialized quarters, clear signs of administrative control. Kiev doesn't stumble into existence. It is built designed by men who think like merchants but act like kings. Life here is harsh but purposeful. In spring and summer, fleets arrive from the north, bringing goods and gossip. In winter, Kiev's people work the forge's craft jewelry repair ships. The city smells of smoked beeswax and ambition. Every tavern echoes with plans for the next voyage. Southward lies Constantinople, the Golden City. The Varangians talk of it as if it were heaven itself. The scent of incense, the flash of gold domes, the emperors who dine from dishes of silver and sleep under roofs of mosaic stars. One day, they say we'll reach it, and when we do, we'll make them remember our names. Kiev grows because everyone wants a piece of it. Slavs bring grain. Turks bring horses. Varangians bring discipline and ships. It becomes not merely a city, but an idea, the northern end of the world's richest trade artery. From now on, to rule the river is to rule Rus. At dusk, the Dnieper glows red with sunset. The new settlers stand on the ramparts, looking south. Below the water, murmurs softly, carrying fragments of driftwood and dreams toward the sea. Behind them, the forests of the north whisper the memory of their homeland. Ahead, the plains of the south shimmer with the promise of empire. They are no longer wanderers. They are builders, traders, turned governors, foreigners, turned founders. The river winds on patient as destiny. The oaths that began in cold Scandinavian halls have carried them here to this warm and fertile bluff. Soon, Kiev will be the beating heart of a vast network of river cities and loyalties, the spine of a civilization that has only just begun to stretch and breathe. The story that survives in ink begins with a single elegant lie. At least that's how it reads to modern eyes. In the primary chronicle, a 12th century monk's tidy attempt to explain the unruly birth of Rusas, the tale goes like this. Once upon a troubled time, the Slavic and Finnic tribes of the north drove out their Varangian overlords. But without those stern, oath-sworn men to keep the peace, the land fell into chaos. Feuds erupted, trade collapsed, the rivers ran unsafe. So the tribes gathered and said, in the monk's immaculate old church Slavonic, "Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come rule and reign over us." A flattering invitation, to be sure, one any conqueror would love to receive. And thus, the chronicle continues. 3 Varangian brothers crossed the sea, Rurik Cineas and Truvor. Rurik took Novgorod, Cineas and Truvor, the neighboring fortresses. They brought law, prosperity, and a dynasty that would last centuries. Everyone lived happily under Scandinavian management, a perfect foundation myth, too perfect. When archaeologists finally start digging into the soil centuries later, they find something far messier and far more interesting. In the ruins of Staraya Ladoga, the old Ladoga that predates Novgorod, they uncover continuous Scandinavian layers reaching back a century before the supposed invitation. Longhouses in the Norse style, smithies producing Frankish patterned swords, silver hoards buried hurriedly under floors, as if war or fear drove their owners to hide wealth they'd never retrieve. Not the traces of guests politely invited to govern, but of pioneers who had been here all along. Traders, settlers, warlords, slowly tightening their grip. The myth of the calling endures not because it is true, but because it's comforting. It turns conquest into cooperation, dominion into friendship. It lets future princes of Kiev claim that they rule not by force, but by consent of the governed. Medieval PR at its finest. Rurik himself remains a blur in the fog of sources. The chronicle calls him a leader from across the sea of the Rus people, a word that likely comes from the Old Norse rudder, the rowing men. Later writers will embellish him into a near-mythic patriarch ancestor of every Russian and Ukrainian prince. But in his own century, he was just another ambitious sea lord with a network of ships and a head for logistics. His genius wasn't conquest, it was consolidation. Where other chieftains burned villages and moved on, Rurik built fortresses, collected tribute, and left garrisons behind. He turned scattered river posts into a chain of command. His base of power seems to have been not Novgorod itself, whose earliest fortifications date a bit later, but a fortified hill called Rurikovo Gorodishche, just downriver. There, the excavators find the fingerprints of statehood being invented, stamped Byzantine seals used for administration, standardized weights that match Islamic dirhams, warehouses of fur bundles tagged with symbols. The bureaucracy of a trading empire, not the loot pile of a raider. Still, politics in the 9th century isn't won by spreadsheets alone. The new Rusas must be defended, and the Dnieper corridor is a very lucrative, very dangerous highway. Each portage is a potential ambush. Each village a potential toll gate. Rurik's oath-sworn bands function as both customs officers and enforcers, collecting dues with spears when silver fails. Yet even this has a civilizing effect. Violence is being professionalized. Instead of random raiding, the region gets organized extortion, a rough draft of government. Across the rivers, word spreads that a new order is forming in the north, led by foreigners who speak the language of oaths and commerce. Some Slavic chiefs resist others, join seeing profit in alliance. Intermarriage smooths the edges. Rurik and his men take local wives. Their children grow up bilingual, bicultural, pragmatic. The dividing line between Norse and Slav blurs until it matters less who you are than which trading post you control. Meanwhile, chroniclers in distant monasteries try to make sense of it all. The monks who compile the primary chronicle in Kiev centuries later have no first-hand memory of these muddy beginnings, only oral tales filtered through politics. To them, Rurik's invitation serves a purpose. It legitimizes their princes as heirs of divine order, not opportunists who seized a toll road. History, they say, is written by the survivors, but in this case, it's ghost-written by their grandchildren. Still, fragments of truth gleam beneath the myth. Around the same years, the chronicle dates Rurik's arrival. Roughly 860 CE Byzantine sources mention a new and terrifying phenomenon northern raiders, called Rus, descending on the Black Sea in fleets. They sack suburbs of Constantinople, vanish, and return again. The emperor's chronicler, Theophanes Continuatus, describes them as barbarians of the north, tall as giants, whose eyes gleamed like wolves. The timing is suspiciously perfect. While the chronicle paints Rurik's people as invited administrators, Byzantine eyewitnesses paint them as fire and steel. Maybe both are true. Perhaps the invitation came only after resistance failed. In Ladoga, winter tightens its grip. The Varangian halls glow with firelight. Traders count silver, while guards sharpen blades. Outside, snow falls in thick silence. Somewhere in the darkness, the old gods of the north and the new spirits of the Slavs share the same wind. Rurik sits at a carved table a cup of mead in hand, surrounded by maps scratched into wax. His lieutenants speak of the Dnieper of Kiev, of the riches that lie beyond. The ruler listens, saying little. He has the watchful calm of a man who knows that time itself is on his side. Soon, his men will move south, securing the next link in the chain. He'll leave trusted kin and captains to govern the north, ensuring that the new order doesn't crumble the moment the ships sail. Among these men is one called Oleg, shrewd, ambitious, patient. Oleg will outlive his master and finish what Rurik began, but that's later. For now, the foundations are still being laid, oaths sworn over fire silver, measured by weight alliances inked in blood and wax. Outside, the rivers lie frozen, gleaming faintly under moonlight. Beneath that ice runs the same current that will one day carry fleets of warships and caravans of merchants. The water is patient. It remembers every keel, every drowned man, every oath. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear it whisper beneath the ice, telling the future in its own slow language. The land is rich. The order is coming. When Rurik dies around 879, the land he leaves behind is more idea than empire threads of loyalty, tied along rivers, held together by oaths, silver, and fear. But even ideas can take root in soil, and his successors will prove that this one can grow into something astonishing. The Chronicle says, Rurik's infant son Igor inherits his father's realm, though it's Oleg Rurik's kinsman and war captain who actually governs. A practical arrangement. The boy is a symbol. The man is the sword. And Oleg knows how to use it. Under his hand, the scattered trade posts and forts of the north begin to look less like a merchant's route and more like a nation. There's Ladoga in the north, the old launch point. Novgorod, the administrative heart. Smolensk, the checkpoint. And Kiev, the shining key at the southern gate. Connect them all, and you have the vertebrae of something new, the spine of Rus. Not Russia yet, but the seed from which it will grow. Oleg's first challenge is loyalty. The Varangian oath is sacred, but distance weakens even iron bonds. So he moves methodically, replacing unreliable local chieftains with Varangian captains, marrying his men into Slavic families, spreading the dynasty's blood like roots through the soil. Every wedding feast doubles as a treaty. Every child born of mixed heritage becomes both hostage and hope, a living bridge between conqueror and conquered. To hold these alliances together, Oleg needs ritual symbols, something more enduring than muscle. He takes a page from both Norse and Slavic traditions, the ceremony of oath-taking over water under the open sky. Each chief swears fealty while touching his blade to a bowl filled with river water and mead. The river binds them all its current, flowing through the oath as surely as through their lands. The ceremony is simple, but its poetry is deliberate. It says, as long as these rivers run, so will our bond. Centuries later, when Kievans baptize themselves in those same waters to embrace Christianity, it will echo this older pagan moment of unity. Administratively, Oleg shows the mind of a bookkeeper trapped in a warrior's body. He standardizes tribute collection along the trade route furs honey slaves wax. Each district owes a fixed portion to be stored in guarded depots before being shipped downriver. The system turns chaos into revenue, creating a dependable stream of resources that can fund armies, buy alliances, and impress Byzantines. Even the Slavic villagers benefit. Raids become rare, trade becomes routine. In its rough transactional way, this is civilization. But governance alone can't forge identity. To make Rus's more than a geographic expression, Oleg needs a myth, and myths are born of action. So he turns his gaze south toward Kiev. The city, perched on its golden bluffs, is ruled by two Varangian warlords, Askold and Dir. They were probably Rurik's former captain's men, who struck out on their own and carved a domain from the Dnieper's trade. Oleg understands that such independence is intolerable. The river system must have one master. The story of how he seizes Kiev will later be retold with a gleam of legend, but at its core, it's a masterpiece of cunning. According to the chronicle, Oleg sails south from Novgorod, pretending to be a mere merchant escorting tribute ships. He moors below Kiev's bluffs and sends word that he is carrying goods from his late kinsman Rurik for the princes of the south to inspect. When Askold and Deer come down to the docks expecting negotiations, Oleg's men spring the trap. "You are not princes nor of princely blood," he declares before his warriors strike. The two men die there on the riverbank, and Oleg claims the hilltop for Rurik's son Igor, proclaiming it the mother of Rus's cities. The scene, whether embellished or not, captures something crucial. Oleg's understanding that the sword can win a city, but legitimacy must wear a crown. He installs young Igor as figurehead, takes the title of regent, and makes Kiev the capital of the Rus. In one audacious stroke, he transforms a trade empire into a kingdom. Archaeology gives the myth backbone. Excavations around Kiev's high ground reveal new fortifications, expanded ramparts, storage pits, and smithies dating precisely to this period. The material record shows sudden urban planning, no longer a loose market town, but a structured, fortified hub, designed to handle tribute and govern territory. Oleg's architects build massive halls in the northern style, yet adapt them to Slavic traditions. Smoke vents in the roofs, courtyards for communal gatherings, granaries beside the armories. It's a literal fusion of two worlds, and from it emerges a new identity. The Dnieper, once a corridor for raiders, becomes the kingdom's main street. In spring, fleets of ships glide down its length, like a convoy of ambition, some loaded with furs, others with warriors or tribute. The routes have names now, the road from the Varangians to the Greeks. It's not poetry, but logistics, yet to the men who row it, the phrase carries a thrill. They are part of something vast and profitable, stretching from the northern birch forests to the golden domes of Constantinople. Oleg proves to be both warrior and diplomat. He understands that the south holds both danger and reward. The Khazars to the east still demand tribute, and the Byzantine Empire beyond the Black Sea is both trading partner and threat. In 907, he leads a legendary expedition to the very gates of Constantinople, his fleet reportedly numbering 2,000 ships. The primary chronicle, in one of its more cinematic flourishes, claims he nailed his shield to the city's walls in defiance, forcing the emperor to sue for peace and trade privileges. Whether that moment of Norse swagger actually happened hardly matters. The treaties that follow are real Byzantine scribes, record clauses granting Rus's merchants rights to dock sell and stay in Constantinople for up to 6 months, their customs dues reduced. Rus's is recognized not as pirates, but as peers in commerce. Back in Kiev, the victory transforms Oleg from regent to legend. Songs are sung about him, the wise ruler, the seer, the man whose foresight unites the rivers. The chronicle later dubs him Veshchi Oleg, the prophet. His death fittingly becomes mythic too. A pagan oracle tells him his horse will cause his demise. He avoids the animal for years, only to visit its bones later and mock the prophecy. A serpent slithers from the skull and bites him, sealing his fate. Moral: you can master rivers and men, but not destiny. When the story ends, Igor Rurik's son finally rules in his own right, inheriting a realm that stretches from the Baltic to the Black Sea. What began as a network of oaths has become a state. Its currency is silver, its backbone is trade, its heart is Kiev, and its soul, though divided among gods, is unmistakably Rus. The Varangians, who once came east seeking profit, have built something greater than wealth continuity. Their names may sound foreign, their graves scattered from Sweden to the steppe, but their system endures a delicate machinery of tribute trade and law that will outlast them all. The rivers still carry their reflection, but the ripples are spreading outward, merging with new waters, new peoples. The merchants have become monarchs, the foreigners founders. The rivers remember everything. They remember Rurik's oaths. They remember the clang of silver at the fords of Smolensk, and now they carry a new name whispered along their banks: Oleg. The man who calls himself Regent Protector Prophet, and perhaps, if the bards are feeling generous, destiny itself. It is the late 9th century, and the north still smells of pine smoke and iron. Rurik is gone, his son Igor still a child, and Oleg, steady-handed, sharp-eyed, has seized the tiller of the new Rus. He understands that to rule this network of rivers and tribes, he must move beyond the cold lakes of Novgorod. Power, real power, flows south, and south means Kiev. The road there is treacherous both literally and politically. The Dnieper meanders through a patchwork of loyalties. Some villages pay tribute to the Khazars, others to local Slavic princes, and some simply to whoever arrives first with the largest axe. The Varangian fleets that slip down the river must be half army, half caravan, every oar doubled as a weapon, every trade post a potential ambush. Oleg sails from Novgorod with a fleet that gleams like frost in morning light. His ships, long and narrow, carry warriors with iron helmets and ringmail that flashes against the water. In their wake follow the supply barges, food, silver tools, the quiet cargo of empire building. The locals watch from the forest's edge, unsure whether to cheer or hide. They've seen these men before as traders. Now they march as rulers. The city of Kiev sits high on its bluff, watching the Dnieper twist below like a silver serpent. Its twin lords, Askold and Dir, are experienced men, Varangians themselves, or perhaps Slavic chieftains who have adopted their ways. Under them, Kiev has grown rich from tolls and tribute, yet even in their timber halls, they must sense change on the wind. They know what happens when northern sails appear on the horizon. You either join or you vanish. Oleg chooses subtlety over siege. The primary chronicle describes the encounter like something out of a saga, and if the details are embroidered by monks, centuries later, the strategy remains sound. Oleg anchors his ships below the city's bluffs, sending envoys to announce that he travels under the banner of young Igor Rurik's heir. He brings rich gifts and requests a meeting with Kiev's princes. Askold and Dir, curious or overconfident, descend the hill to the docks. There, they find Oleg waiting with warriors hidden behind the ship's sides. "You are not princes, nor of princely blood," Oleg declares. Then, with ritual precision, the blades rise. The meeting becomes an execution. Askold and Dir fall where they stand, and Oleg claims the bluff for Igor. It is conquest disguised as coronation. Legends say Oleg stands over their bodies and proclaims, "Let this be the mother of Rus's cities." A poetic exaggeration, perhaps, but one that feels true. For here on this sunlit hill, above the river, a new world takes shape. Kiev, small, fortified, and surrounded by vast plains, becomes the beating heart of the Rus. It's a place perfectly positioned between the northern forests and the southern steppes, between the Baltic and the Black Sea, between raw ambition and the glitter of Byzantium. Archaeologists centuries later will find evidence that the myth aligns with reality. Around 880 CE, the wooden walls of Kiev expand dramatically. Beneath later cathedrals lie the charred remains of fortifications hastily rebuilt, suggesting that, yes, the city changed hands by force. And within the new layers appear Varangian artifacts, Frankish swords, Nordic brooches, weights for silver trade, all signatures of Oleg's men settling in. Oleg wastes no time turning conquest into governance. He installs Varangian captains to command key river stations and leaves local Slavic leaders in charge of day-to-day affairs, a careful balance of strength and diplomacy. Tribute flows north wax honey slaves and fur, each load stamped with Oleg's seal. The river's once chaotic highways of opportunity become organized trade routes under centralized control. Rus's is no longer a collection of oaths, it's becoming a system. He reforms military logistics too. Rather than rely solely on seasonal raiding parties, Oleg establishes permanent garrisons at key portages. These strongpoints, little wooden forts, manned by mixed Varangian and Slavic crews, serve as rest stops for commerce and checkpoints for tribute. Soldiers become customs officers. Merchants double as intelligence agents. For the first time, the Dnieper route can be navigated from Novgorod to the Black Sea under one authority. It's bureaucracy, Viking style, efficient, dangerous, slightly drunk. Yet Oleg is not content to rule from the riverbanks. His gaze keeps drifting southward toward the horizon where the Dnieper meets the Black Sea, and beyond that, the golden domes of Constantinople. Every story returning traders tell of the Byzantine capital only fuels his fascination. They speak of marble streets, of churches glowing with mosaics, of emperors seated on mechanical thrones that rise and bow like living things. For men from the cold, wooden north, it sounds like sorcery. But Oleg, practical as ever, here's something else: opportunity. To reach Constantinople is to control the most lucrative market in the known world. The Byzantines will pay dearly for furs, slaves' wax, and amber. They will also pay ransoms, tributes, and trade privileges, especially if properly persuaded by the sight of a few hundred northern longships at their harbor gates. So, Oleg begins to prepare quietly, methodically, for an expedition that will make his name immortal. He spends years fortifying Kiev, stockpiling ships, and negotiating alliances. Slavic tribes once hostile are wooed with gifts and oaths. Those who resist are disciplined with fire. The Khazars, long the toll collectors of the southern routes, find their influence crumbling as Rus's control expands. Oleg even establishes treaties with nomadic tribes of the steppe, ensuring safe passage for his future fleet. Every move he makes tightens the net around Byzantium. But before he sails, he cements Kiev's transformation from outpost to capital. New defensive walls rise broad enough for carts to roll along the ramparts. The city's layout grows deliberate streets radiating from the prince's compound, specialized quarters for craftsmen and traders. A marketplace near the docks becomes a hive of activity where Greek coins mingle with Arabic dirhams and Nordic hack silver. Kiev hums like an engine. To outsiders, it must look chaotic, but beneath the noise lies structure. The merchants weigh their silver on Varangian scales, and their contracts, though unwritten, are enforced by Oleg's men with uncompromising fairness. In a rough, barbaric way, law has arrived. At night, Oleg stands on the ramparts, watching the torches flicker along the river. The Dnieper stretches south, black and endless, reflecting 1,000 points of light. Somewhere far down that current lies the city he intends to humble. The monks, who will later call him the seer, imagine a mystical glow in his eyes, but the truth is simpler. He's calculating logistics. The distance, the season, the food supply, the number of men needed to haul the ships across the rapids. It's not prophecy, it's planning, and it will work. For now, though, Kiev rests. The markets are quiet, the forges cooling. The air smells of smoke and thawing earth. The people don't yet know it, but they stand at the edge of an age. Their city, once a backwater of river traders, is about to become the heart of a civilization stretching from the Baltic to Byzantium. The Varangians, who came seeking furs and fortune, are now rulers, diplomats, engineers of destiny. Oleg turns from the river and descends the rampart stairs, his cloak whispering against the wood. Tomorrow, he'll review the ships again. The oars must be fitted, the sails patched, the crews drilled. There is always more to do when one is building a state out of water and willpower. Behind him, the wind from the steppe carries faint scents of spring grass smoke, and something else, the smell of empire still new and raw. Soon, his fleets will thunder south, and the world will learn that the merchants of the north have become the masters of the rivers. The year is around 907 CE, and the Dnieper shimmers under a hard blue sky. Down its long spine, the river fleet of Oleg glides southward like a procession of mirrors, each sail white against the water, each hull carved with a snarling dragon's head. To the men rowing, it feels less like war and more like destiny. Ahead lies Constantinople, the golden horn, the jewel that dazzles the imagination of every Varangian merchant and poet. From the Baltic to the steppe, the Byzantine Empire, ancient and glittering, watches the northern horizon uneasily. For decades, the Greeks have traded with these strange blonde men who arrive each spring with furs, wax, and slaves, and leave with gold coins and amphorae of wine. But now the relationship shifts. Rusas no longer comes begging for trade. It comes demanding terms. Oleg knows that diplomacy without leverage is prayer, and prayer is not the Varangian way. As his armada drifts down the Dnieper, every oar stroke seems to echo through history. Chroniclers will exaggerate the numbers, 2,000 ships, some say, but even half that would be enough to shake the seas. The ships move like an iron tide passing the rapids, with careful precision, dragging hulls overland when necessary, patching seams with tar and wax. Behind them, the tribes of the riverlands watch in awe. No one has ever seen such unity among the northern men. This is not a raid. This is an embassy with teeth. When Oleg's fleet finally enters the Black Sea, the sailors taste salt on the air and marvel at the endless horizon. They've left behind the green gloom of the forests and emerged into the open throat of empire. Constantinople rises ahead, its walls glimmering pale gold in the sun, domes sparkling like a necklace of planets. Some men, hardened by years of rowing and raiding, fall silent. Others cross themselves nervously, unsure which gods rule this place. Even Oleg, who has never bowed to fear, feels the pull of something immense. According to the primary chronicle, the Byzantines panic. The Emperor Leo VI, seeing the northern sails blot the horizon, orders the harbor chains raised and the gates locked. The Varangians cannot breach the city by sea, but they can devastate everything around it. The chronicle, with typical Norse flair, claims Oleg's men drag their ships ashore on greased wheels and sail them overland to the city walls, turning the siege into a piece of absurd engineering brilliance. Whether literal or symbolic, the message is clear. The Rusas can reach you anywhere. The Greeks, masters of negotiation, do what they always do. When brute force arrives, they reach for parchment. Emissaries meet Oleg outside the city. One can almost picture it, the Byzantine diplomats in silk and gold, their perfume fighting the smell of tar and pine resin from Oleg's cloak. They speak of friendship, of mutual prosperity. Oleg listens patiently, eyes calm, and then demands tribute and trade privileges worthy of an equal. He is not a supplicant, he is a sovereign. And so the Varangians achieve something no barbarian tribe before them had managed: not the sack of Constantinople, but something more profitable: recognition. The Treaty of 907, followed by later agreements in 911, reads like a business contract drafted by warriors who suddenly discovered paperwork. It details rights of Rus's merchants in the imperial capital, how long they may stay, 6 months, what duties they will pay none, and what gifts they must offer, modest ones. The Byzantines even agree to supply them with food baths and lodging at imperial expense. In exchange, the Rus pledge peace and friendship. The North has been formally invited into the world's richest economy. For Oleg and his men, it is triumph, not of sword over wall, but of will over distance. When he returns to Kiev, legend says he nails his shield to Constantinople's gates, leaving it there as an immortal boast, the mark of a northern ruler on the marble heart of the south. Whether the shield ever existed, the idea does, and it gleams in every saga that follows. Back in Kiev, the celebration lasts for weeks. The markets overflow with Byzantine wine glassware and silk. The city's wooden halls glitter with imported luxuries. The scent of foreign incense mingles with pine smoke. The air hums with new songs about Oleg's victory. Storytellers turn logistics into legend, giving the expedition a mythic shine that will outlast the facts. The conqueror of Constantinople becomes Oleg the Seer, the wise one who foresaw his destiny. Yet beneath the celebration lies something even more important: transformation. The treaty changes Rus's forever. Trade replaces raiding as the backbone of power. Where once silver came from plunder, now it flows from tariffs and tolls. The warriors become merchants. The merchants become diplomats. In taverns and fortresses alike, people start talking less about blood and more about law, about how contracts and oaths might serve better than axes. Kiev blossoms. Its quays choke with ships unloading amphorae, of wine Greek pottery bolts, of silk olive oil, even fine Byzantine icons. Artisans learn new techniques from southern craftsmen jewelry, with enamel inlays, cloaks dyed imperial purple. The once wooden town takes on a hint of marble in its imagination. For the first time, Rus sees itself not as a backwater on the edge of the world, but as a participant in a grand civilized web of trade stretching from the Black Sea to the Baltic. The treaty also leaves fingerprints on language and law. The word Greciany. Greek goods become shorthand for luxury, bureaucratic habits. Byzantine style begin to seep north, written contracts, seals of authority regularize tribute. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rus shifts from a culture of oral promises to one of record-keeping. Every mark on parchment is an echo of Oleg's negotiations by the Golden Horn. And yet, even as trade softens the edge of Varangian ferocity, it doesn't erase it. In Kiev's taverns, old warriors still boast about the days when ships rolled across the steppe on wheels, when the Greeks cowered behind their walls. The city's children grow up hearing tales of their fathers who reached the ends of the world. The pride of the axe remains now wrapped in velvet, but no less sharp. Oleg himself fades into legend, as rulers often do. The chronicle gives him one last prophecy, that his death will come from his beloved horse. He laughs at it, keeps the animal away for years, and then finding it dead, mocks the prediction, until a snake slithers from the horse's skull and bites him. A poetic death for a man who turned pragmatism into myth. The soldiers bury him by the river, where water and destiny are never far apart. His legacy, though, doesn't lie in omens. It lies in systems. The treaties he forged with Byzantium establish Rus as both bridge and buffer between worlds, the raw forests of the north and the polished marble of the south. They open channels through which not only trade, but ideas, religion, and art will flow for centuries. The path he carved with his oars becomes the spine of Eastern Europe. At dusk, Kiev's merchants light oil lamps imported from Greece. The glow flickers on amphorae of wine on scales weighing silver on letters bearing imperial seals. Outside, the river murmurs in the dark, carrying barges heavy with goods back north. The water glints with the reflection of the stars, those same stars the sailors saw over Constantinople. The line between empire and frontier has blurred. Somewhere, a bard begins a new verse about Oleg the Seer, the man who conquered, not by burning cities, but but by signing contracts that outlived kings. His story spreads up the rivers, like ripples carried from Kiev to Novgorod to the frozen harbors of the Baltic. And with each telling, it becomes a little more myth and a little more truth, exactly how the Varangians would have liked it. The rivers are restless again. Oleg's fleet is long gone, his treaty ink dry, and the oaths he forged still echo across the Dnieper. But peace, like all currencies, eventually devalues. The merchants of Kiev grow rich, the princes grow proud, and soon a new name begins to ripple down the river routes: Igor, son of Rurik. He inherits a kingdom that hums with trade and ambition. Under Oleg's careful stewardship, Rus's has become a machine of tribute and exchange goods, flowing from the northern forests to the Black Sea, and back coin glinting in the hands of merchants, and Kiev rising like a wooden crown above it all. Yet Igor, young and eager, feels trapped in another man's system. His heart still beats to the rhythm of oars and war drums. The treaties that once felt like triumph now feel like chains. To rule in this world, a prince must do two things: well collect tribute and command fear. Igor attempts both with characteristic enthusiasm and mixed results. Each spring, he rides out with his retinues, Varangian veterans and Slavic warriors alike, to gather dues from the tribes that owe Kiev allegiance: the Drevlians, the Severians, the Ulichians. The process is as old as empire and as risky as tax collection can get when your clients all own axes. The Drevlians, forest dwellers west of the Dnieper, are both prosperous and proud. They've paid tribute before to the Khazars, to Oleg, to anyone strong enough to demand it, but their patience wears thin. When Igor appears one spring, demanding more than usual, their chiefs exchange dark looks. The chronicle, ever moralistic, says he was greedy for silver. Perhaps he was merely overconfident, mistaking fear for loyalty, a common mistake among men born into power. The first payment is made. Igor departs. Then on the road home, he hesitates. Perhaps his captains remind him that Oleg would have demanded more. Perhaps the sight of his empty coffers nags at him. Whatever the reason, he turns back with a smaller band to collect again. The Drevlians, unimpressed by this new round of accounting, decide they've had enough. In the chronicle's grim understatement, they seize him, bend two birch trees to the ground, tie one of his legs to each, and let them go. The first prince of the Rus dynasty dies torn in half an accountant's death in a barbarian's world. Back in Kiev, the news travels like lightning. The court falls silent. The markets tremble. A ruler has been murdered, and the realm teeters on the edge of chaos. The Drevlians, emboldened, send envoys to Kiev with an audacious proposal. Since Igor is gone, perhaps his widow, the Princess Olga, will agree to marry their Prince Mal and unite their lands peacefully. They imagine a simple negotiation. They have never met Olga. Olga of Kiev is a woman history tries and fails to confine to footnotes. When the envoys arrive, she receives them with the grace of a queen and the patience of a chess player. She listens to their proposal, nods thoughtfully, and replies that she will indeed honor their offer. But first, she must show them the proper welcome. They are carried into the city on their own boats, borne by servants through the streets as a mark of respect. Then, as the chronicle reports with serene horror, she has the boats dropped into a trench and buried alive. Thus, she says, shall you be honored. This is only the beginning. She sends word to the Drevlians that she will accept their proposal after all, and requests that their most distinguished men come to escort her to their prince. When they arrive, resplendent and unsuspecting, she invites them to bathe. Before meeting her hospitality, she insists, demands cleanliness. As they enter the bathhouse, the doors are barred, and the building set ablaze. The smell of burning pine and perfume fills the sky. Her third act is more theatrical still. She travels to the Drevlians' capital of Iskorosten, modern Korostan, under the pretense of holding a funeral feast for Igor. The townspeople, moved by her apparent forgiveness, drink heavily in his honor. When they are well and truly drunk, her soldiers fall upon them. Thousands die in the night. The chronicle's monkish author, unable to decide whether to condemn or admire her, simply writes, "She avenged her husband wisely." Yet Olga's vengeance, for all its fire and blood, is also administration. Once the Drevlians are subdued, she reforms the entire tribute system, creating fixed collection points and routes known as pogosti, essentially tax districts with permanent administrators. For the first time, Rus has something resembling bureaucracy. Taxes can now be collected by officials instead of armies, ensuring both efficiency and fewer dismemberments. Historians will later credit her with laying the groundwork for a functioning state. Her reign marks a subtle turning point in Rus's identity. The days of pure Varangian dominance are fading. The Norse tongue is giving way to Slavic speech. The pagan gods of Asgard mingle with the thunderer Perun and the river spirits of the east. In this multicultural stew, Olga stands as both culmination and transition, a Norse woman ruling a Slavic kingdom through intelligence sharper than any blade. Years later, her story takes a surprising turn. Seeking stronger alliances, Olga travels to Constantinople. Imagine it, the queen of a raw wooden north, stepping into the marble brilliance of the imperial court. Byzantine chroniclers describe her with fascination and a little fear. She meets the Emperor Constantine VII himself, who, flattered by her wit and dignity, reportedly considers marrying her. Olga, playing the diplomat, agrees only on one condition, that he baptize her first. He does, becoming her godfather in the process, which by Byzantine custom makes any marriage between them incestuous. When he realizes the trick, she smiles and declines his offer. She returns to Kiev as the first Christian ruler of Rus, though her people remain stubbornly pagan. Her son Sviatoslav will reject her new faith with characteristic bluntness. "I do not understand it," he says. "Let us rather keep our father's gods." Yet Olga plants a seed that will bloom 2 generations later, under her grandson Vladimir the Great, when Rus finally converts to Christianity. But for now, she rules a realm still balanced between axe and icon, vengeance and law. In the wooden halls of Kiev, merchants weigh silver under oil lamps, priests mutter pagan prayers beside icons of Christ, and the queen's envoys collect tribute with bureaucratic precision that makes the Drevlians' rebellion seem like another age. The river, eternal witness, carries it all south toward the Black Sea. Furs wax honey, and the first whispers of a faith that will one day define an empire. Olga dies in peace, a rare privilege in her family. The monks who later canonize her call her equal to the apostles, which is an ecclesiastical way of saying, "Don't mess with this woman." Yet even sainthood can't sand down the edges of her legend. In her, the Varangian fire and Slavic resilience fuse into something enduring, a civilization that can burn cities or build churches depending on the day. By the middle of the 10th century, the city on the Dnieper had become something astonishing. Where once a cluster of timber huts clung to a hillside, Kiev now gleamed figuratively, if not yet literally, with the wealth of half a world. Smoke rose from forges and bakeries. Bells tolled from wooden towers. Foreign traders haggled in half a dozen languages across the market square. The scent of beeswax, roasted meat, and river mud hung in the air like a signature perfume of prosperity. If Constantinople was the queen of cities, then Kiev had become her ambitious northern cousin, less refined perhaps, but growing richer by the day. Every road in this rising kingdom seemed to flow downhill toward the Dnieper. Its current carried the lifeblood of Rus's furs from the Arctic amber, from the Baltic honeywax slaves and iron, and in return came the luxuries of the South, Byzantine, silk, Persian spices, Syrian glass Greek wine. The river was more than a trade route now. It was a cultural conveyor belt, drawing civilizations together with each passing boat. Travelers entering Kiev in these years must have felt as if they had arrived at the crossroads of the earth. The docks along Podil district were lined with ships from every horizon, Varangian longboats with dragon prows, broad Slavic barges piled with grain, squat Byzantine merchantmen packed with amphorae. The air vibrated with noise, sailors shouting, children chasing stray chickens, blacksmiths hammering repairs. Above them, on the high bluffs, the prince's compound stood like a wooden citadel, its palisades gilded by the sun. From that height, the ruler could look down upon the living artery that made his city breathe. Under Olga's reforms and the vigor of her son, Sviatoslav, Kiev now functioned less like a tribal kingdom and more like a corporation, efficient, ruthless, and obsessed with profit. Tribute flowed in from every direction: the Polians, Drevlians, Severians, Radomics, and dozens more tribes, each paying their quota in furs, grain, or slaves. These goods were stored in warehouses by the river, counted, taxed, and redistributed southward. In return, Byzantine merchants flooded the market with goods that must have seemed pure sorcery to the northern eye: candles that burned without smoke, fabrics softer than dreams, wine sweet enough to make a warrior forget winter. And where goods flowed, people followed. Greeks, Armenians, Khazars, Jews, Arabs all found a place in Kiev's cosmopolitan maze. The city's lanes became a living atlas: Greek perfumers beside Norse blacksmiths, Slavic potters beside Jewish moneylenders, steppe horsemen selling meat near monks peddling icons. It was chaotic, yes, but also magnetic. The Rus were becoming middlemen to the world, a hinge between Christian Byzantium, Muslim caliphates, and the wild northern forests still ruled by pagan gods. The Varangian elite adapted quickly. Many had once imagined wealth only in plunder. Now they discovered the pleasures of contracts, credit, and coin. The old warrior code, honor measured by blood spilled, was giving way to something subtler: reputation measured by reliability. A man's word, still sacred, could now be quantified in silver. Those who broke deals found themselves blacklisted from the markets, their oaths worthless. Civilization, it turns out, is often just commerce wearing a clean tunic. Kiev's artisans grew skilled in ways that surprised even their patrons. Goldsmiths learned filigree from Byzantine masters and mixed it with northern patterns of beasts and knots, creating a hybrid style that glittered like frost. Weavers produced linen so fine it could pass through a ring. The prince's palace displayed icons painted on imported panels next to carved idols of Thor and Perun, evidence that faith here, as in trade, favored diversity. Yet for all its sophistication, Rus's still carried the raw energy of its frontier past. Beyond the city's walls stretched a land of forests and plains, dotted with fortresses where local lords collected tribute. In winter, the Dnieper froze into a gleaming highway of ice, over which sleds creaked southward, laden with goods. In spring, the ice melted and the river roared to life again, carrying ships like migrating birds. Life in Rus was seasonal, rhythmic, a heartbeat that rose and fell with the thaw. The princes of Kiev, first Igor, then Olga, and now their son Sviatoslav, understood that commerce and conquest were two sides of the same coin. Tribute was reliable only when backed by fear, and fear only when financed by trade. Sviatoslav, a warrior with the soul of an accountant, embodied this paradox perfectly. He dressed, simply ate with his soldiers, slept on the ground, but his campaigns stretched across continents. He broke the power of the Khazars, shattered the Bulgars of the Volga, and even threatened Byzantine interests in the Balkans. His empire on the march looked less like a state and more like a caravan with teeth. Each victory brought spoils, but also connections. Every captured city along the southern steppe became a link in the Rus trade chain. When Sviatoslav rode, his banners carried the scent of commerce as surely as conquest, the silk of Byzantium snapping in the wind beside the wolf pelts of the north. The steppe nomads called him the Bold One, the Byzantines called him the Barbarian Prince, but his merchants called him profitable. Back in Kiev, the wealth he generated transformed daily life. Houses once built of logs were now clad in planks and ornamented with carved beasts. Women wore imported jewelry, Byzantine earrings, Persian beads, Nordic brooches, each piece a miniature map of the routes that converged here. Monks copied scriptures on parchment brought from Constantinople, their ink mixing with the scent of beeswax candles and the faint salt tang of southern seas. Even language evolved. Old Norse phrases faded, replaced by a Slavic tongue, rich in loanwords from Greek and Turkic traders. The people of Kiev were no longer foreigners. They were something new, something hybrid. The city's nighttime skyline, if you can call it that, in an age of wood and flame, was breathtaking. Torches flickered along the ramparts. Fires burned in every courtyard. And from the docks, the lights of anchored ships twinkled on the river like a second constellation. The Dnieper whispered below, a dark ribbon of wealth and memory. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled from the forests, a reminder that civilization here was still a campfire surrounded by endless wilderness. Merchants spoke of the route from the Varangians to the Greeks as if it were alive, a serpent whose scales glittered with silver coins. Its head rested in Constantinople, its tail coiled around the lakes of the north. Along its length moved not only goods, but ideas, stories of saints and emperors, rumors of wars, innovations in shipbuilding and law. Rus was learning from its neighbors and teaching them in turn. It had become a crossroads of faiths, ambitions, and economies, a Silk Road of the North. When Byzantine envoys visited Kiev, they marveled at the orderliness of its trade, the discipline of its guards, the hospitality of its ruler. They also noted its pagan shrines and sacrifices, its fierce independence. These people, one Greek wrote, are both savage and splendid. A perfect description, really, of a society halfway between raiding and Renaissance. Yet prosperity breeds its own peril. Wealth attracts envy, and unity, once achieved, is easily fractured. The Varangian princes grow richer. The tribal lords chafe under tribute. The more Kiev shines, the more shadows gather beyond its gates. For now, though, no one sees the storm. The city basks in its golden moment, alive with laughter, and trade its princes certain that the rivers will always flow their way. By the time Prince Vladimir comes of age, the Dnieper no longer whispers, it roars. The trade routes are thriving. Kiev gleams with wealth, and Rus stands poised between two destinies. Yet beneath the splendor, the realm trembles. The house of Rurik, descendant of those first Varangian oath brothers, has split against itself. Bloodlines tangled like river reeds, ambition turned inward. When Sviatoslav the warrior dies ambushed on the Dnieper by Pecheneg nomads, he leaves behind 3 sons, Yaropolk, Oleg, and Vladimir. Each inherits a slice of his empire, and each wants the whole. The result is as predictable as a spring flood. Within months, the brothers are at war. Yaropolk rules from Kiev, smooth and calculating. Oleg holds the Drevlians' forested lands. Vladimir governs the northern frontier at Novgorod, a colder, hungrier place where ambition grows like frost. When Yaropolk's men ambush and kill Oleg, Vladimir flees across the sea to his mother's kin in Scandinavia. There, amid the long halls and dark mead, the exiled prince plots his return. Legend says he recruits a band of Norse mercenaries, hardened men, who fight for silver and saga. One can almost see them tall, mail-clad, their shields painted red and black, their laughter echoing like distant thunder. They call him Valdemar, and when they set sail for the east, their oaths to him are sealed in blood and coin. When he lands again on Rus's soil, Vladimir moves swiftly. Towns fall in quick succession. Yarapolk's allies crumble. Kiev itself opens its gates without a fight. In a dark twist, worthy of myth, Vladimir lures his brother into a peace meeting and has him killed. The monkish chronicler, horrified, writes that he did evil before God. Yet even he must admit that the realm needed a ruler strong enough to unite it again. Vladimir proves to be that ruler. He is a contradiction, wrapped in fur and ambition part, barbarian part, visionary. His court blends the rawness of the north with the Polish of the south. Feasts last for days. Envoys dine beside warriors. Poets declaim in Norse, Slavic, and Greek. The prince himself eats, simply listens more than he speaks, and laughs easily, though no one doubts the steel beneath the charm. He rules first by fear, and then by fascination. He expands the fortresses along the frontier, secures the steppe against nomads, and reasserts Kiev's control over the river routes. Yet his greatest conquest will not be of land or gold, but of the soul. Religion by this time has become both a political tool and a philosophical puzzle. Rus is surrounded by great faiths: Christian Byzantium to the south, Islamic Volga, Bulgaria to the east, Jewish Khazaria, lingering in decline, and the pagan traditions of its own people. Each tribe worships in its own way, sacrifices to thunder gods, dances for river spirits, toasts to ancestors. The resulting diversity is chaotic, but it also leaves Vladimir curious. The primary chronicle, half history, half parable, describes how he decides to choose a single religion for his realm, as though shopping for a worldview. He sends envoys in all directions to study the great creeds and report what they find. Their journey reads like a medieval travel documentary. To the Volga Bulgars, they go first. The Muslims, they report, live cleanly and pray often, but abstain from wine and pork. Vladimir, who believes a feast without drink is treason against joy, shakes his head. Drinking, he says, is the joy of the Rus. We cannot exist without it. Next, his emissaries visit the German lands of the Western Christians. They find their rituals solemn, their churches modest, their clergy stern. The envoys return unimpressed. There is no beauty there, they report only sorrow and coldness. Then come the Khazars, once mighty, now faded. Their faith, the envoys say, is noble, but lonely, too small for the vast soul of Rus. Finally, they travel to Constantinople. There within the great Hagia Sophia, they stand beneath a dome vast as heaven and watch the divine liturgy unfold. Gold and incense fill the air. Choirs sing in Greek so pure it feels like light turned into sound. The envoys weep openly. When they return to Kiev, they tell their prince, "We no longer knew whether we were on earth or in heaven. Their God dwells among men, and their service is fairer than in all other lands." Vladimir listens, perhaps already knowing what he'll decide. Byzantium is not just beautiful, it's strategic. To embrace its faith is to join its world to gain legitimacy, culture, and trade privileges. A shared religion could make Rus part of an empire without being its subject. It is, in short, a brilliant move disguised as a revelation. Still, diplomacy requires drama. Around 988 CE, Vladimir leads his army south and besieges the Byzantine city of Cherson in Crimea. When the Emperor Basil II beset by rebellions, begs for help. Vladimir offers a deal. He will send troops if the emperor's sister Anna becomes his wife. Basil balks. A princess of Byzantium does not marry barbarians, so Vladimir takes Cherson by force, proving himself difficult to refuse. The marriage goes ahead, but only after Vladimir agrees to convert. He is baptized, the chronicle says, in the waters of Cherson, or perhaps in a version more beloved by poets, in the Dnieper itself. The prince who once sacrificed to thunder gods now bows his head beneath Christian waters, and the old gods of Rus begin to fade like mist. When he returns to Kiev, he orders the idols of Perun and the other pagan gods cast into the river. The statue of Perun, tall and bearded, is dragged through the streets and thrown into the Dnieper to drift away. The people weep and shout, but Vladimir is relentless. The next day, he summons the entire city to the riverbank. Whoever does not come to the river tomorrow, he declares, will no longer be my friend. And so beneath the summer sun, thousands gather. The waters churn with bodies, men, women, children, slaves baptized en masse in the current of history. Priests chant, banners flutter, and the people who once called themselves pagans emerge blinking into a new faith. The Dnieper, already the spine of Rusas, becomes its baptismal font. It is a moment both political and mystical. The chronicler, never one to miss symbolism, writes, "The people rejoiced that they now knew God and saw the joy upon the face of their prince. Whether they truly felt joy or simply obedience hardly matters. The act binds Rusas to Byzantium, and by extension to Europe." Vladimir's reign after baptism is a study in transformation. Churches rise beside markets. Priests arrive from Constantinople to teach reading and law, and icons replace idols in homes once scented with sacrificial smoke. He sponsors schools, frees debtors, and opens granaries during famine. The same hand that once ordered executions now signs edicts of charity. Even the monks admit grudgingly that grace works in mysterious ways. Kiev, already rich, becomes radiant. Its merchants trade silver for silk. Its artisans paint icons in the Byzantine style. Its scribes copy psalms beside Old Norse runes carved into benches. The city hums with both sanctity and commerce, and for the first time in its brief, brilliant history, Rus begins to think of itself not merely as a route between worlds, but as a world of its own. The baptism of Kiev might have begun as a spectacle part, theater part, statecraft, but its ripples move outward through the centuries like light across water. In its wake, the land of the Rus begins to change in ways no one, not even Vladimir the Great, can fully control. Imagine standing on one of the city's high wooden towers, a decade after that fateful summer in 988. Below you, Kiev stretches out in organized chaos, smoke from 100 hearths curling into the gray sky bells from new churches mingling with the hammering of forges, traders shouting in half a dozen tongues. It's the same city of markets and ships, but something in the air feels different, quieter, heavier, with meaning. Where once stood shrines of carved wood, now rise the first stone churches. Where idols of Perun once leered with wooden fury, now icons shimmer in gold leaf and candlelight. The transition is not simple. Faith rarely changes by decree. Many of the people baptized in the Dnieper still keep small household gods tucked in corners, their faces carved in secret. Hunters still whisper to the spirits of the forest. Farmers still leave offerings of bread and milk at the edges of their fields just in case. But the new faith has momentum. Priests from Byzantium arrive carrying scrolls, relics, and a confidence born of empire. They set up schools in the prince's palace to teach Greek letters, chant hymns in echoing halls, and dazzle locals with tales of saints who walk on water or face down emperors. Even skeptics find it hard to argue with men who can read. The transformation begins from the top down. Vladimir orders churches built across his realm, each dedicated to Christ or the Virgin, each standing where a pagan temple once stood, as if to overwrite old memory with marble. The first of these, the Church of the Tithes, is financed with 1/10 of his treasury. Its walls gleam with frescoes and mosaics brought by artisans from Constantinople, a northern echo of the Hagia Sophia. When its doors open, crowds pour in, blinking at the strange beauty candles, flickering painted saints, staring from walls like living witnesses. To a people raised on wooden idols, it must feel like stepping into heaven's vestibule. Christianity brings more than rituals. It brings infrastructure for ideas. Written language flourishes. The Cyrillic alphabet, adapted from Greek, spreads through schools and monasteries. For the first time, the Rus can record their own history rather than letting others define it. Priests copy psalms, scribes draft laws, merchants keep ledgers. In a culture once defined by oral oaths, ink becomes the new instrument of faith. The old Varangian pragmatism. Whatever works we'll use proves surprisingly compatible with Christian organization. Churches double as tax centers. Monasteries manage estates. The system that once collected tribute in furs now gathers tithes in coin. Religion becomes the new bureaucracy, and salvation, like trade, requires proper accounting. The city's skyline changes too. Wooden halls give way to stone churches, whose domes gleam with tin and gold. The cross becomes as common a symbol as the axe once was. Artists, who once carved serpents and runes, now shape icons, flat stylized, but alive with color. In their faces, one can still glimpse something northern, the calm severity of people who have weathered endless winters. It's as if the old gods haven't died, but simply learned new names. Conversion softens the manners of the elite, at least on paper. Laws grow more merciful, blood feuds less common. The new Ruskaya Pravda, or law of Ruses, replaces revenge with fines. Kill a man now, and instead of burning his village, you pay his family compensation. A practical improvement for a nation built on trade. The same impulse that once weighed silver on scales now weighs guilt. Diplomacy transforms as well. With a shared faith, the princes of Ruses can marry into European dynasties. Vladimir's sons and daughters will link Kiev to Poland, Hungary, Norway, even France. One granddaughter, Anne of Kiev, will marry King Henry I of France, becoming the mother of future French kings. The blood of Rurik and the baptismal waters of the Dnieper will mingle with the veins of Europe itself. But the Christianization of Ruses is not just diplomacy, it's identity building. The pagan gods had been tribal local, tied to weather and harvests. Christ, by contrast, is universal ruler of all lands, judge of kings. For a realm strung together by rivers and trade, this universality offers cohesion. Suddenly, the fishermen in Novgorod, the traders in Smolensk, and the nobles in Kiev share not only currency, but creed. It's the first time Ruses feels like a single civilization. Still, not everyone sings hymns with equal enthusiasm. Pagan revolts flicker for decades in the hinterlands. In the forests of the north, old shamans curse the cross and call down storms. In the south, nomads on the steppe scoff at the meekness of men who now kneel to pray. Yet Vladimir handles dissent with calculated tolerance. He's not an ideologue. He's an administrator with an eye for efficiency. As long as taxes are paid and roads remain open, a little heresy can be forgiven. The prince himself becomes a paradox worthy of legend. The same man who once filled his harem with hundreds of concubines now spends evenings listening to priests debate theology. He builds orphanages, frees debtors, and hosts feasts for the poor, earning him the title Vladimir the Saint. but he still rides out at the head of armies, his sword engraved with crosses instead of runes. Salvation, it seems, hasn't dulled his edge, only polished it. At night, Kiev glows differently now. Instead of pagan bonfires, the light comes from candles in church windows. Their warm halos drift across the river, shimmering on the water's surface. Choirs practice in the new cathedral, their voices weaving through the dark like silver threads. The sound is both alien and intimate, echoing off wooden roofs and open hearts. Somewhere, an old fisherman hums along without understanding a word, moved by melody alone. This merging of old and new gives Rus's its peculiar character, a Christianity draped in furs, sung in Slavic tones, scented with pine and incense. Byzantine diplomats find it rustic. Western clerics find it strange. But for the people who live it, it feels perfectly natural. Faith, like trade, is something you adapt to local conditions. Over time, the sons of Vladimir inherit a country both blessed and burdened by its transformation. The temples are gone, but the pagan imagination remains. Icons glow like enchanted talismans. Saints behave suspiciously, like old household spirits, and every miracle still smells faintly of snow and wood smoke. A new civilization is being born, one where merchants quote scripture, soldiers carry crosses on their shields, and scribes begin writing the first true chronicles of Rus. The rivers of Rus have always flowed south silver to the markets of Byzantium warriors to its wars. But around the year 988 the tide changes. For the first time the current of history runs both ways. From the forests of the north comes an army that will guard the palaces of emperors. From the cold lakes of Novgorod to the marble of Constantinople, the Varangians will carve a legend not of conquest, but of loyalty. It begins as most great stories of diplomacy do, with a bargain. Emperor Basil II of Byzantium, the Bulgar slayer. The Iron Emperor finds himself in trouble. His throne wobbles beneath him. Aristocrats in Anatolia rebel. Mercenaries desert. Allies prove unreliable. His empire, glittering and ancient, suddenly feels fragile. Word of his desperation reaches north to the court of Vladimir the Great, who has only recently baptized his people and married Basil's sister Anna. Their alliance is still fresh, their faith newly shared. And so in one of those brilliant political maneuvers that define centuries, Vladimir offers aid, not just a few ships, but a wall of men. He sends 6,000 warriors south, the flower of Rus's veterans, hardened by steppe raids and winters so cold, even wolves keep near the fires. These are not conscripts. They are oath-bound Varangians men, for whom loyalty is religion, and death in battle is the cleanest form of prayer. They are tall, fair-haired, iron-disciplined, and slightly terrifying. Byzantium has seen northern mercenaries before, but never in such number, never so unified, never under such command. When they arrive in Constantinople, the contrast must have been surreal. Imagine these fur-clad northerners stepping through the city gates, the marble streets shimmering under the Mediterranean sun, the air heavy with incense and spice. They pass mosaics of saints' fountains, of carved stone market stalls stacked with citrus and silk. The locals stare at them, half in fear, half in fascination. Pale giants smelling of pine and iron, moving in perfect formation, their axes gleaming like new theology. Basil II meets them in the courtyard of the great palace, surrounded by courtiers in gold-threaded robes. The emperor is a man of few words, more soldier than scholar. He studies the newcomers, sees in them what he needs, a force untouched by the intrigues of his court, bound only to oath and gold. He offers them service and pay that would make a priest question his calling. The Varangians accept. They kneel before the emperor, their axes laid flat on the marble, and swear loyalty not to any Greek faction, not to politics, but to the throne itself. Thus is born the Tagmaton Varangion, the Varangian Guard. Their baptism of fire comes almost immediately. Basil marches them against the rebels of Bardas Phocas, a general who has declared himself emperor. The Greeks fight cautiously. The Varangians fight like an avalanche. Chroniclers record their fury and awe. They charged as if drunk on battle, and none could stand before their axes. When the dust settles, the rebellion lies broken. The emperor at last secure rewards his northern saviors with honors land and a place in the beating heart of his empire. From that day forward, the Varangian Guard becomes Byzantium's most elite corps. Their duties are simple but sacred: to protect the emperor, to stand watch at the palace gates, to guard the imperial treasury, and to serve as his personal strike force. Their loyalty is so absolute that they are often entrusted with the grim ritual of blinding traitorous nobles or executing condemned princes, a task Greeks find too delicate and Varangians perform with impersonal efficiency. The emperors sleep more soundly, knowing these strangers stand between them and betrayal. Yet there is something poetic, almost ironic in their presence here. The descendants of northern raiders now guard the very empire their ancestors once tried to plunder. They walk the same marble streets their forebears once dreamed of looting. But they have changed, and so has the world. The axe, once an emblem of chaos, is now the symbol of fidelity. The Byzantines quickly learned to respect and fear them. Contemporary writers describe their tall stature, their love of strong drink, their fierce devotion to one another. Anna Komnene, the emperor's daughter and chronicler of later centuries, calls them axe-bearing barbarians, whose faithfulness surpasses all others. They are paid in gold and privileges. Each receives a share of the emperor's personal treasure after his death, a tradition known as Paludisvarf, a golden inheritance that cements their loyalty even beyond the grave. In time, the Guard becomes a legend within a legend. They parade before the emperor in ceremonial armor, scale mail gleaming cloaks of crimson axes polished to mirror shine. When foreign ambassadors visit, they see this wall of northern steel and understand immediately Byzantium's power is not just marble and prayer. It is muscle oath and myth. Many of these men never return north. They marry Greek women, buy houses near the Golden Horn, and end their days drinking wine instead of mead. Others, after years of service, return home to Kiev or Scandinavia, richer than kings and bearing stories that sound like hallucinations, palaces of gold thrones that move by clockwork mosaics that shimmer like water. Their sagas will carry the name Miklagardr, the great city, back to the icy halls of the north. One day, their ranks will even include a prince. A Norwegian exile named Harald Sigurdsson, known later as Harald Hardrada, the Hard Ruler, will join them, rise to command, and return home laden with Byzantine gold to claim his own crown. But that is still far in the future. For now, the Guard's reputation grows with each campaign. They fight in Bulgaria, in Syria, in Sicily, wherever the empire needs a thunderclap. Wherever they go, they leave behind whispers that these northern giants fear no man, that their loyalty is worth more than an army of locals, that they guard the emperor as if guarding a god. And so, under the gilded domes of Constantinople, the Varangian oath finds its ultimate expression. The same promise that bound the first Swedes across frozen fjords now echoes in Greek, "We serve the emperor until death." When one of them dies, his comrades carry his body to a church by the sea, singing in deep voices that make the marble tremble. Outside, the waves crash against the quay water, meeting water north, meeting south. For Byzantium, they are both exotic ornament and steel backbone. For Russes, they are proof that the once barbarian north has been accepted among the empires of the world. No longer raiders, no longer mere traders. These are the sworn hands of civilization itself. If you wandered the marble corridors of Constantinople around the turn of the first millennium, you might have heard it, the rhythmic thud of boots, echoing through the imperial palace, a sound too heavy to belong to Greeks. The guards passing in formation were giants by local standards, broad-shouldered, pale-haired, their faces carved by northern winters. Each carried a great two-handed axe, its blade polished bright enough to catch the light from mosaicked ceilings. These were the Varangians, the emperor's chosen wall of steel, the men who guarded his life and his throne with equal zeal. To the Byzantines, they were both exotic and essential. Foreigners, yes, but foreigners without ties to local factions. They had no Greek relatives to bribe, no political ambitions beyond their pay and honor. In an empire poisoned by intrigue that made them priceless, a Varangian's loyalty was simple and absolute: I serve until death, or until gold runs out. In Constantinople, ever pragmatic, made sure the gold never did. Their quarters lay near the Blachernay Palace, overlooking the Golden Horn. There they lived in disciplined chaos. Rows of barracks, lined with shields, laughter spilling from doorways, thick with smoke and mead. They feasted on salted meat and strong wine, sang songs of home in languages few Byzantines understood, and swore oaths under flickering torchlight. When not on duty, they could be found in taverns along the harbor, their coin purses fat, their voices booming, their reputations larger than life. Locals called them tsakonis, or axe-bearers, sometimes in admiration, sometimes in exasperation. By day, however, their professionalism was unmatched. Every morning, they assembled before the emperor's chambers, standing shoulder to shoulder in glinting armor. Their axes, taller than a man's chest, gleamed like cold fire. Even courtiers, who spent their lives scheming for power, grew quiet when walking past them. The Varangians were reminders that beneath all the gold and ritual power still depended on steel and on men who knew how to wield it. They fought not only in the palace, but across the empire. When rebellions erupted in the Balkans or Anatolia, the emperor's orders were simple: send the Varangians. Their reputation for ferocity preceded them. In battle, they were terrifying discipline, wrapped in chaos, roaring in strange northern tongues as their axes rose and fell. Chroniclers described them cleaving through enemy ranks like farmers through sheaves. Against the Bulgarians, they stormed fortresses that others feared to approach. Against the Fatimids and the Saracens in Syria, they carved their way through desert dust and heat. The axe, designed for splitting logs, proved equally adept at ending wars. For this, they were lavishly paid. Byzantine gold flowed north along the old Varangian trade routes, transforming entire towns in Scandinavia. Archaeologists have unearthed hoards of coins stamped with the faces of emperors: Basil II, Constantine VIII, Romanos III, found in Swedish and Russian soil, each coin a frozen echo of service rendered far away. Some even bear inscriptions bent from being tested between teeth. Others were hoarded in carved wooden chests by men who never made it home. Each piece of gold tells the same story: courage sold and well bought. The Varangians' dual nature fascinated Constantinople. In the palace, they were silent sentinels, guardians of ceremony. In the field, they were berserk storms. This paradox civilized ferocity became part of their legend. Poets described them as lions chained by oath, and even the emperor's enemies came to respect them. One Arab chronicler called them the angels of death, who walk in gold. The Greeks themselves began to adopt bits of their imagery. The double-headed axe found its way into imperial symbolism, a token of foreign loyalty made domestic. But gold and glory come with shadows. The Varangians were famously incorruptible, except by the empire itself. Constantinople was a city that could seduce marble. Its mosaics shimmered with eternal light. Its streets pulsed with temptation. For northern men used to snow and silence, It was overwhelming a paradise that whispered. Some fell to its charms, gambling fortunes away, marrying locals, vanishing into the city's warm labyrinth. Others returned home wealthy, but changed speaking Greek curses and quoting saints. A few found faith-swapping amulets of Thor for crosses their piety as intense as their appetite for battle. The Byzantines both admired and mocked them. They praised their valor, but laughed at their manners. They eat like bears, one courtier complained, and drink like rivers. Yet when an emperor processed through the streets, it was the Varangians who formed the honor guard axes, glinting their deep-voiced chants, echoing through the hippodrome. Their presence lent gravitas to every ceremony, an unspoken message. The emperor's will is backed by men who do not understand mercy. Among the ranks, stories spread like sparks. They spoke of Harald Sigurdsson, the young Norwegian exile who rose through the guard's ranks by sheer audacity. He led campaigns in Sicily, where Varangians fought Arabs amid orange groves, and in southern Italy, where they faced Norman knights beneath burning suns. Harold's leadership turned the guard from palace ornament into expeditionary spearhead. He would return north rich beyond imagining, soon to become Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, the last great Viking. Through him, the legend of the Varangians would echo from Constantinople to the fjords, binding two worlds in myth. And yet the Varangian Guard was more than its heroes. It was a living institution, a fraternity of the oath. Members came from Russes, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, even England after the Norman conquest. When Anglo-Saxon warriors fled William's rule, they too found refuge here, swelling the Guard's numbers with men who still called themselves huskarls. For a century, Greek chroniclers would note their accents shifting from Norse to English, but their loyalty never wavered. The oath transcended language. Their service wasn't without blood on their hands. When emperors died, it was the Varangians who sealed the palace gates, executed traitors, and defended or delivered the throne to its rightful heir. They were the empire's immune system, brutal, clinical, sometimes tragic. To serve the emperor was to live at the edge of danger and to die in gold. By the 11th century, the Guard had become a legend inside and outside Byzantium. In the north, tales were told of comrades returning with chests of coins and stories of cities where the walls themselves glittered. In Constantinople, parents frightened children into obedience by whispering, "The Varangians are coming." Even emperors spoke of them with reverence and a touch of fear. Because the Varangians were faithful, yes, but their faith was not submission. It was contract. And contracts, like steel, must always be kept sharp. When night falls over the imperial capital, the great palace glows like a lantern above the sea. Inside, marble halls stretch into shadow. At the emperor's chamber door stand two Varangians, immovable, silent, their breath rising faintly in the candlelight. Beyond the walls, the city sleeps, dreaming of saints and conspiracies. But here, at the heart of empire, nothing moves that is not permitted. The men from the north keep watch, their hands resting on the hafts of their axes. They have sworn to serve until death, and in Byzantium, death is never far. The story of Harald Sigurdsson begins, as so many great northern tales do, with exile, ice, and ambition. He is only 15 when he flees Norway. His half-brother, King Olaf II, cut down at the Battle of Stiklestad. In 1030, his dynasty shattered. The boy rides east through the forests and frozen rivers, swordless but not broken, carrying nothing but his name and the fierce conviction that destiny still owes him an answer. He finds refuge, as lost Norsemen often do, in the lands of Rus. At the court of Prince Yaroslav the Wise in Novgorod, Harold grows tall and sharp-eyed. He learns the languages of traders, the craft of diplomacy, and the art of patience. Yaroslav, Ever pragmatic sees the spark of a future warlord in this restless exile and takes him in. The young prince joins Rus's campaigns along the Dnieper, earning his first scars and the respect of men twice his age. But Harold's gaze is fixed farther south toward the glittering empire that has already drawn so many Varangians Byzantium. When he finally reaches Constantinople, around 1034, the city must look to him like a hallucination of gold and marble. The Hagia Sophia rises like a mountain of light. The streets smell of incense and citrus, and the language of command is Greek. Harold enlists in the emperor's Varangian guard, joining the brotherhood of northern mercenaries who serve as the empire's shield and sword. Here, under the purple banners of the Komnenoi and the Dukai, the boy from Norway becomes a legend. He fights in Sicily, in the Levant, in Anatolia, wherever the emperor's will demands blood. Chronicles describe him charging under blazing suns, his armor black with sand and salt, his axe sweeping in arcs that leave silence behind. He helps retake cities from Saracens, plunders fortresses, and commands men twice his age with the cold authority of one who never doubts his own fate. The Greeks call him Araltes. His comrades call him the Thunderbolt. In Sicily, his campaigns read like scenes from an epic. He storms coastal towns with Byzantine marines, sails through waters that gleam turquoise beneath burning skies, and takes spoils so rich that he sends home chests of gold and silk to Yaroslav's treasury for safekeeping. Even in the heat of the Mediterranean, the northern oaths remain. When his shipmasters swear brotherhood before battle, they still do it with mead and iron, speaking in tongues that predate Christ. Between wars, Harold moves in imperial circles. The Byzantine court, decadent and cunning, fascinates him. Some sources, half gossip, half legend, claim he wins the favor of the Empress Zoe herself, a woman known for her beauty, her intrigue, and her dangerous taste in lovers. Whether true or not, the rumor adds to his myth, the exile who not only conquers kingdoms, but charms their queens. Yet ambition, not romance, drives him. Byzantium rewards his service with gold, but not freedom. He is too successful to be trusted, too famous to be released. So like a caged falcon, he plots escape. Around 1043, amid political chaos in the capital, Harold seizes his chance. He and his Varangian comrades seize ships in the harbor, possibly with Yaroslav's assistance from afar, and fight their way out through the Bosphorus under a hail of Greek fire. One chronicler swears he blinded the eyes of an imperial admiral with his own hands. Another says he escaped in the night like smoke. However it happened, by the time the sun rises, Harold Sigurdsson is gone from Byzantium, rich beyond imagination, and carrying scars that shine like medals. When he returns north, he is no longer the boy who fled a lost battle. He arrives in Rus's, draped in Byzantine silk, his ships heavy with treasure and stories. Yaroslav welcomes him as an equal, and Harold soon marries the prince's daughter, Elisiv, tying himself to the royal bloodline that once sheltered him. For a time, he rules in Novgorod as regent, but the north is calling again. In 1046, he sails for Norway to reclaim the throne his half-brother lost. Norway receives him with a mix of awe and suspicion. The man who returns is no mere Viking. He is a product of three worlds, Scandinavian steel, Slavic strategy, and Byzantine grandeur. He earns the crown through alliance and intimidation, sharing rule briefly with his nephew Magnus the Good, until Magnus's sudden death leaves Harold sole king. The sagas call him Harold Hardrida, Harold the Hard Ruler, and he earns the title well. His reign is both magnificent and merciless roads, repaired laws, codified, rebels executed. He brings to Norway the discipline of the Varangian Guard and the arrogance of empire. Yet even a king cannot rest. Ambition hums in Harold like a second heartbeat. He eyes Denmark first, then England, where another Norseman King Snut once ruled. The lure of conquest pulls him westward toward one last campaign that will burn his name into legend. In 1066, answering a call from an English earl who promises support, Harold sails across the North Sea with a fleet of 300 ships, the last great Viking army to ever leave Scandinavia. They land near York, clash with local forces, and triumph at Fulford. The spoils glitter. The men boast that England will be theirs by winter's end. But fate, ever the trickster, brings another army north, led by Harold Godwinson, England's king. The two meet at Stamford Bridge under a bright September sun. The Norsemen caught unarmored after victory's wine scramble to form a shield wall. Harold rides at their head, tall, fearless voice, booming over the clatter. Forward, the brave shall live forever in song. He fights like the last echo of an age. Arrows darken the sky. The bridge runs red. Men fall in heaps around him. One arrow finds its mark striking his throat as he lifts his sword to rally his men. The hard ruler falls, and with him falls the last true Varangian king. When the battle ends, the river carries the bodies of his warriors out to sea. The sagas say the tide turned red, that the water itself mourned the passing of the North. Within weeks, William the Conqueror lands on England's southern coast, ending the Viking dream forever. And yet, even in death, Harold Hardrada unites worlds. His wealth, his bloodline, and his legend link Scandinavia, Rus, and Byzantium into one shimmering thread. He embodies everything the Varangians had been: wanderers, oath keepers, empire builders, men who crossed boundaries until no boundaries remained. From fjords to deserts, from pagan to Christian, his life is the last saga of the age when the North ruled the rivers. By the time Harold Hardrada fell beneath the English arrows at Stamford Bridge in 1066, the echo of his world, the world of the Varangians, was already fading across the east. In the cities of Rus, the longships still floated on the rivers, but the men who rowed them no longer spoke the tongue of Odin and Thor. The axe had given way to the quill, the rune to the cross. The twilight of the Northmen had begun soft as dusk and just as inevitable. In Kiev, the market still thrived, the bells of St. Sophia still rang, and the princes of Rurik still ruled. Yet walk its streets in the late 11th century, and you would hear something strange. To Viking ears, the language of the city had changed. The clipped consonants of Old Norse, those hard northern syllables that once shouted over the crash of oars, had been swallowed by the rolling vowels of Slavic speech. The grandchildren of the Varangians spoke not of fjords, but of forests, not of Valhalla, but of heaven. A few scattered runes, still carved into doorposts or jewelry, were now charms, curiosities, tokens of a half-remembered past. The transformation was not violent nor mournful. It was absorption, the slow alchemy of culture. The Northmen had not been conquered. They had blended. Generations of marriages between Scandinavian traders and Slavic women had woven the two peoples together until distinctions blurred. The princes of Rus still traced their bloodline to Rurik, that mysterious chieftain who had crossed the Baltic 2 centuries earlier, but their minds and hearts belonged to Slavic soil. The Norse word konungur, king, had become Niaz. The gods of Asgard had yielded to the saints of Constantinople. This was no longer the land of adventurers. It was a realm of laws and letters. The Ruskaya Pravda, or Law of Rus, appeared during the reign of Yaroslav the Wise, a compact of written justice that replaced revenge with fines feud with regulation. Under its code, a killing could be weighed and compensated in silver, theft punished by restitution rather than blood. It was pragmatic, detailed, and humane, a mirror of a society moving from clan to state, from impulse to order. One could almost say the Varangians had brought their discipline of oaths into law, giving it parchment and permanence. The change was visible in the art as well. The warriors who once wore amulets of Thor's hammer now commissioned silver crosses. In workshops along the Dnieper, artisans began blending motifs, interlaced Norse knots curling around Slavic saints, Byzantine halos glowing above faces that still carried northern cheekbones. The heavy gold torques of the old warriors were melted into chalices, their axes reforged as candlesticks for church altars. Even their burial customs shifted from the ship fires of the old gods to the quiet order of Christian cemeteries. Fire gave way to earth, and legend to liturgy. Somewhere in Novgorod, around 1100, a craftsman scratched a note on a strip of birch bark, a casual message to a friend written in Cyrillic script. It read simply, "Come at noon. Bring wax." No runes, no incantations, just business. Yet in that small line, historians see the turning point. A people who once carved destiny in stone now wrote grocery lists on bark. Civilization, in all its mundane glory, had arrived. Still traces of the old spirit lingered. In the forests of the north, where Christianity moved slower than the seasons, villagers whispered to river spirits and wore iron charms shaped like anchors or hammers, not fully knowing why. Old songs persisted, melodies of storm and voyage sung now as lullabies. The Norse concept of fate weird slipped quietly into the Slavic notion of sudba, destiny, written by God's hand rather than one's own. The world had changed its script, but not its rhythm. The princes of Rus's grandsons of warriors, sons of scholars, ruled a land that glittered with Byzantine influence. Their courts employed scribes and priests rather than skalds. They built stone cathedrals with frescoes in Greek style, their walls washed in blue and gold. Their archives filled with charters, their treasuries with silver dirhams from the east and Venetian coins from the west. Trade still pulsed along the rivers, but it was no longer driven by raiding fleets. It was managed by contracts sealed in wax and oaths sworn before crosses. The Varangian energy had not died. It had simply been domesticated. And yet sometimes at the edge of the known world, a glimmer of the old wanderlust would flash. A trader from Novgorod would head north toward the White Sea, chasing rumors of new lands. A mercenary from Kiev might still ride south to serve as a Varangian in Byzantium, following in the footsteps of Harold Hardrada. Even in the 12th century, the emperors of Constantinople still relied on their northern guards, now fewer in number, mostly English or Ruses by birth. But the tradition endured. The oath still stood, "We serve until death." For the common folk, the change was subtler but deeper. The wooden idols that once stood by the rivers had long since been thrown down, but their memory clung to the soil. The people still spoke of Domovoy, the household spirits who guarded the hearth of Vodyanoi, who ruled the waters. These were not the gods of Odin's hall, but cousins of the same lineage, a folk religion that carried pagan DNA beneath Christian robes. The same imagination that once peopled the seas with monsters now filled the forests with saints and miracles. The old magic didn't die, it converted. By the close of the 12th century, a traveler descending the Dnieper would find a world transformed. The riverbanks still shimmered in the morning light, but instead of longships, he'd see barges heavy with grain. Instead of war cries, the air carried the chanting of monks. Kiev's skyline rebuilt again and again, glowed with golden domes instead of wooden watchtowers. At night, candlelight flickered through narrow church windows, and the reflections trembled on the river's surface like stars. Somewhere beneath those waters lay forgotten relics of the old world iron blades, rusted chainmail bits of dragon-headed ornament buried in silt. The river carried them along with equal indifference, as it always had. The Northmen had come, ruled, blended, and disappeared, leaving behind not ruins, but roots. Their blood ran in the veins of princes. Their oaths echoed in the laws. Their songs slept beneath the new prayers. By the dawn of the 13th century, the land of Russes stood on a knife's edge, wealthy, learned, devout, and utterly divided. The golden generation of princes who had built cathedrals and law codes were gone, replaced by quarrelsome heirs who squabbled like crows over a carcass. The old Varangian unity, the oath-bound brotherhood that once tied river to river, north to south, had long since faded into memory. What remained was the shell of empire cracked by pride and softened by prosperity. Kiev still glittered with its domes of gold, but its power was more ceremonial than real. The city that had once commanded the flow of tribute from forest to sea now presided over a chorus of rival voices. To the north, Novgorod had grown into a merchant republic, governed not by princes, but by a council of burghers and traders. In the northeast, the cities of Vladimir and Suzdal carved out their own domains amid the endless birch forests. To the west, Galicia and Volhynia courted Poland and Hungary, eager to turn their faces toward Europe. Each prince of Rurik's bloodline ruled his corner of Russes like a miniature king. Each minted his own coins, raised his own walls, and claimed descent from the same mythical founder. They fought not barbarians, but each other. Armies clashed for trade routes, tribute, and pride. Fortresses changed hands so often that some chroniclers simply gave up recording which flag flew where. The chronicles sigh with exhaustion. Princes fought among themselves, and the land was laid waste. For the merchants and peasants, life went on beneath the thunder of rival banners. The rivers still carried grain and furs, and the bells of monasteries still tolled across the plains. But even as daily life endured, something vital slipped away. The routes that once bound Russes to Byzantium began to shift. The Dnieper, the great Varangian highway, was choked by tariffs and raiders. Trade trickled north toward the Baltic, where the Hanseatic League and Novgorod's Republic took control. The southern horizon, the old path to Constantinople, was fading from memory. And then from that same southern horizon came the fire. In the year 1223, the princes of Rus first heard of strange riders from beyond the steppe horsemen who fought without banners, who struck and vanished like storms. They called them Tatars, or men of hell. The princes, suspicious even in peril, assembled a vast coalition to face the threat near the river Kalka. It was their first meeting with the Mongols and their last victory of pride. The Mongols did not fight like any foe the Rus had known. Their arrows whistled from impossible distances. Their movements were ghostly and precise. The princes charged in disarray, confident in their armor and numbers. The Mongols' feigned retreat lured them into the plains and then encircled them in silence. When the killing began, it was methodical. The flower of Rus's nobility fell where they stood. Captured princes were crushed beneath wooden boards, while Mongol generals dined above them. An act both literal and symbolic, the empire of oaths was now the empire of ashes. The invaders vanished as quickly as they came, galloping east with the swiftness of myth. The survivors told tales of horsemen who drank the wind and shot from the sky. Then for a generation, nothing, silence and fear, as if the steppe itself were holding its breath. But in 1237, the silence broke. Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis, returned with an army that blotted out the horizon. The Mongols came not as raiders, but as engineers of destruction, siege engines flaming arrows, and an organization so disciplined it bordered on divine. One by one, the principalities of Russes fell. Ryazan burned first, then Vladimir, then Suzdal. Chronicles described their fate with numb horror. There was no eye left to weep for the dead. Monasteries became pyres. Cathedrals became tombs. Kiev, the mother of cities, was the last. In December of 1240, the horde surrounded its walls. Inside, monks prayed, citizens sharpened axes, and the bells of St. Sophia tolled their own funeral. The siege lasted 10 weeks. When the gates finally splintered, The Mongols poured in like a tide of iron. They slaughtered without haste or malice, just efficiency. The cathedral was stormed, its icons smashed, its mosaics blackened by fire. When the smoke cleared, only ruins remained. A chronicler would later write, and the city stood empty as if no man had ever been there. That winter, the Dnieper froze red. The fall of Kiev marked not just the death of a city, but of an age. The last vestiges of the Varangian world, the oaths, the river routes, the memory of a single Rus crumbled beneath hooves and flame. Yet even in ruin, something of their order survived. The Mongols, masters of control, preserved what was useful. They taxed the surviving towns, demanded tribute, and kept the trade routes open. The princes who bent the knee were spared, allowed to govern as vassals under the Khan's seal. The horde destroyed the independence of Rusas, but paradoxically ensured its continuity. Under Mongol rule, new centers rose from the ashes. In the forests far north of the steppe, the princes of Moscow and Tver began to thrive, tiny settlements once overlooked by history. They learned the art of tribute and bureaucracy from their conquerors, collecting silver for the horde and skimming just enough to build fortresses and churches. It was survival, but it was also apprenticeship. The legacy of the Varangians, those northern oath keepers who had once rowed their ships down these same rivers, endured in fragments. Their language was gone, their runes erased, but their habits of loyalty, of hierarchy of order, through commerce, lived on beneath the Mongol yoke. When Moscow would one day rise, it would borrow the Varangian instinct for structure, and the Mongol instinct for fear, a strange inheritance, but a powerful one. In the centuries to come, Kiev would be rebuilt, and the domes would shine again. Yet beneath the new bricks lay layers of ash, where once Norse traders and Slavic princes had sworn oaths over silver scales. Those oaths, like their makers, had turned to dust. And if one were to walk the steppe at twilight, where the grass hides old bones and the wind hums across forgotten fields, one might still find traces of iron beneath the soil, bits of chainmail, rusted spearheads, fragments of the axes that once ruled these rivers. They sleep there now, quiet and brown, with time their edges dulled, but their story unbroken. The Northmen came to the east, chasing silver and glory. They built kingdoms, wrote laws, baptized nations. And when the fire finally came for them, they did not vanish. They sank into the earth they had once conquered, leaving behind laws, legends, and a silence heavy enough to outlast the centuries. The story of the Varangians does not end in flame, only in distance. Long after their ships rotted and their axes dulled, their shadow lingered in the domes of cathedrals, in the veins of kings, in the quiet persistence of rivers that still flowed the same ancient routes. History rarely grants closure. It leaves echoes, and the Varangians left them everywhere. In Moscow's cathedrals, beneath the weight of gilded icons, the descendants of Rurik still prayed for victory and legitimacy. They no longer called themselves Varangians or even Norsemen. They were princes, czars, emperors, rulers, who traced their line back to that first oath on the Baltic shore when Rurik and his kin agreed to bring order to the land of Rus. From their blood came Ivan the Great, who gathered the fractured principalities. From him, Ivan the Terrible, who built the first true Russian Empire. Even centuries later, Romanov Tsars would claim that same lineage, styling themselves as heirs to Rurik, as though the legitimacy of an entire nation could be rooted in a forgotten Scandinavian chieftain. In Kiev, too, the ghosts of the Varangians stirred. The city they founded, destroyed and rebuilt, became a cradle of identity for two nations, Russian and Ukrainian alike, each claiming descent from the same Dnieper dawn. Its stones still whisper of their presence. Norse runes, etched faintly into the foundations of churches, Viking-style brooches found beneath Christian altars, silver coins stamped with tridents and crosses the old world and the new bound together in metal. Even its crest, the trizub, the three-pronged symbol of modern Ukraine, traces its lineage to the sign of Rurik carved on seals 1,000 years ago. The Varangians unknowingly had minted the future. Their legend also endures far to the south in the archives of Byzantium. In the Chronicles of the Emperors, the Varangian Guard remains an enigma, barbarians who became the empire's most loyal sons. Monks wrote of them with awe. These men of the north hold no fear of death. They fight for their emperor as for God himself. The Greeks marveled that such fierce pagans could become the bulwark of Christendom. To later Norse poets, the Guard became myth warriors who lived amid marble palaces and golden mosaics, whose deeds filled sagas that glowed with equal parts pride and homesickness. Even in Icelandic manuscripts written centuries later, the word Miklagarður, the great city, their name for Constantinople, appears like a refrain shimmering at the edge of memory. And somewhere in that memory stands Harald Hardrada, the last Varangian king. His story passed down in verse half, history, half dream. To the Norse poets, he became both hero and ghost, the boy who sailed east in exile and west in conquest, binding the world together with courage and arrogance. In his legend, the north met the south, and the rivers of Ruses met the sea of destiny. Every saga that tells his tale keeps the Varangian spirit alive, a reminder that history's greatest journeys begin not with empire, but with exile, archaeology. Ever the quiet historian keeps uncovering their footprints. In the soil of Staraya, Ladoga coins from Baghdad gleam beside fragments of Norse swords. In Novgorod's frozen mud lie combs carved from walrus ivory chess pieces from Dublin beads from Persia. At Gnezdovo, near Smolensk, excavators uncover ship burials, half Slavic, half Scandinavian, where warriors rest beneath mounds of birch and clay, their helmets rusted, but their honor intact. Even in the marble of Hagia Sophia, a single line of Norse graffiti endures. Halfdan carved these runes. 1,000 years later, the words are still legible, a whisper from a homesick guard who wanted to prove for eternity that he had stood there. Modern historians debate endlessly who the Varangians truly were. Were they invaders, or founders mercenaries, or merchant Scandinavians, or Slavs by the end? The answer, of course, is yes to all. They were the hinge of civilizations, the seam where Europe and Asia stitched together. Their legacy is not in conquest, but in connection, the way they turned rivers into highways, languages into hybrids, and oaths into law. Through them, silver from the caliphates found its way into Norse hordes. Christian saints mingled with pagan thunder gods, and Europe's idea of itself quietly expanded eastward. Even now, the archaeologist's trowel and the poet's pen keep reshaping their story. Each discovery, an amber bead, a sword, hilt a scrap of silk, adds another line to the saga. The old stereotypes of Vikings with axes give way to something subtler: administrators, traders, lawgivers, founders. The Varangians are no longer just the storm that struck. They are the bridge that endured. Stand on the banks of the Volkhov or the Dnieper today, and you might still sense them. The water glints under the same sky they once rode beneath. Fishermen cast their nets where their ships once glided. Church bells echo where their horns once sounded. The oaths they swore have long since dissolved, but the rivers remember. They always do. The north still flows toward the south, the Baltic still feeds the Black Sea, and every ripple carries the ghosts of oars and ambitions. The Varangians may have vanished 1,000 years ago, but in stone and silver, in language and law, in the calm pulse of water against shore, they are still here. And if you listen at dusk, when the wind softens and the river sighs, you might hear what the centuries could not silence the faint rhythm of rowing the creak of timbers and the eternal whisper of the oath that began it all. We serve, we keep faith, we endure.